Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's performance will include oxes, asses, shepherds dropping deuces, and a Mary as big as a house. All this and more on this Christmas spectacular deep dive episode of Created Things. A very happy Christmas and welcome to this Yuletide edition of Created Things, the only podcast on the arts hosted by two men who believe that pooping in a field might be a sacred act. I am your host, artist and psychotherapist Jacob Flores Popcheck, and with me as always is my good and excellent friend, Dominican priest, Father Gabriel Toretta. How are you doing today, Father?
I was doing fine, but now I'm so wrapped up with this thought about pooping in a field, which I just wasn't really ready for, but I feel like I want to have the kind of heart that could always be available to think about the sacramentality of pooping in a field. I'll get there someday, Jacob.
Yeah, this is aspirational.
Yeah.
This is like vision.
I thought you were going to say
board
this
kind
is
of
ass burgers, which is one way of going with it, but I didn't. That's not where I was hoping we were going to go.
Oh.
So we'll just stick with
No,
aspirational. Yeah, good.
Yeah, aspirational. Yeah, I guess it's arguable, but no, I'm going to keep that on my vision board for now. I do think though that you and I are starting, because as we often say, we don't plan these podcasts at all. We decide on a topic, we both think of what we want to say, and then we don't tell each other, and that includes these intros, which we take turns doing. And I feel like we're increasingly just sort of throwing each other like a monkey wrench every time we intro the podcast, where you'll intro it and I genuinely don't know what in the living hell you're talking about.
What would you say? Yeah, exactly. That's this is kind of the goal. I mean, we're getting close to the point where this is going to be. It's like the speech equivalent of like Dada art. It's like, here's a toilet, and I broke something.
I nailed a banana to a wall.
Call the cops.
I used to have a ministry partner back when I was like doing ministry when I was a young wide-eyed franny. I am more jaded now.
Yes,
but we used to do some like theology of the body-ish type talks, and this guy did like amateur close-up magic.
Okay.
And so what he would do is he would like get on stage, and without warning me, he would just do a trick. Like he would often do this where he would just do a trick at the beginning to like warm up the crowd. And then he would say, and now my ministry partner, Jacob, will explain what that trick has to do with the theology of the body.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Down. And so like it became a game where we would just do this and like try to screw with each other and see. We got drunk before talks a couple of times.
Seems solid,
just
yeah.
Saw if we could deliver it right. And like we always did a really good job, but we would come as close to not doing a good job as we possibly could for fun.
That's when you're given the same set of talks that are maybe a little bit boring at one point, like that's kind of how things go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is absolutely how things go.
Yeah.
That is absolutely how things go. Hopefully that's not how this podcast goes. We are edgy, but we're not edgelords.
Yeah, and right now I'm seeing you drink what purports to be Starbucks coffee, but
yeah, I'm drinking a peppermint mocha today. And actually, this reminds me. So the last two episodes I've been wearing Christmas sweaters.
Yeah, what's wrong with you? You're like half naked.
Oh, just hold on.
Oh, don't stand up. Oh, do not. Oh, by the way, those of you who are only listening to this podcast, you should thank your lucky stars right now, because Jake is about to stand up.
I'm wearing a shirt, I'm wearing pants, and I'm not even about
He's
to
not
stand
even
up.
about to stand up. Okay, so now we've been given false promises. Okay, yes?
Right. No. Hold on. I wore my two consecutively favorite Christmas sweaters. The first one I wore a reindeer sweater. The last one we didn't even get to talk about because we jumped in the topic too fast. But I wore a polar bear sweater where the polar bear oddly looks like me.
Okay.
And that's why I have it. He has like the same hipster glasses and like the same goatee, and he looks just like me. So I wore that last time. This time I'm not wearing a Christmas sweater. I'm just wearing my classic white Henley. But that's because I wanted to surprise you with what I was going to put on.
Is that a Macklemore pimp jacket? Oh, no, wait. It's even better.
It's a full-on leather Santa coat.
Okay. Gentle listener, I didn't know that Santa coats came in leather or that leather coats came
Yeah.
in Santa. I don't know what to say. This is
It's leather. It's got like reindeer fur around the collar and the hood. Here's the hood up.
oh my gosh. Like you could legitimately like be in an Arctic wilderness in that.
It's so warm. It's ridiculous.
How far down does it go?
And
Like does it go down to your knees?
It goes down to my ankles. This is the
How did
like
you
full
get
length
how
of
did you
this
get
thing.
this? Did you
Okay,
did
so
you
let me
kill
tell you about
Santa?
this. And
did you just you can say
I did not
just
I did not
nod
kill
yes or
Santa.
no? Okay.
I did not kill Santa. So, and if you guys want to see this coat, you should check out the YouTube version. Search created things on YouTube. But there is a series of films on Netflix. They came out with the first one 2 years ago. Came out with the second one last year, called The Christmas Chronicles, where Kurt Russell
Yes.
plays a like sexy rock star badass version of Santa Claus.
Okay. We all could have seen that coming.
What you don't see coming, though, is how passionately Christian these movies surprisingly are.
What?
Because it's the only Santa. So he plays rock guitar and he like flies this awesome sleigh pulled by the reindeer, and he's super magical and like kind of a bad boy Santa. But it's the only Christmas movie I've ever seen that explicitly says and shows that Santa and Saint Nicholas are one and the same.
Huh.
At one point, there is actually a flashback where a character says, now this was when he was still bishop in Asia Minor, and they show him in full vestments going door to door, putting stuff in shoes.
That's
And
awesome.
then the plot of the second one is that apparently what keeps Santa alive forever is that he has a shard of the Star of Bethlehem that fell to Earth as a meteor.
Uh-huh.
The Star of actually was a meteor, and it's inside the Christmas star at the North Pole Christmas tree. And somebody steals it and pushes, the North Pole into crisis.
Yeah.
So it's like firmly set within the religious Christmas.
Wow.
And like shows Kurt Russell as like ancient St. Nicholas investment putting coins into shoes. But also he's this bad boy who like teaches prisoners the true meaning of Christmas by getting put in a drunk holding cell and then playing Merry Christmas Baby on a magically manifesting rock guitar.
Yeah, that all
Anyway.
seems reasonable. Yeah. So this led to you acquiring a ankle length.
Yes, I bought his coat from the movie. Not the exact one, but I bought a cosplay version of his coat from the movie because I love it so much. And it is red leather and it's got reindeer fur on the trim.
It's
And I'm obsessed with it.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, how can you wear it inside though? Like it genuinely looks like you are gonna suffocate and die.
I'm gonna have to take it off in like 8 minutes because I'm sweating actual Christmas baubles right now.
Yes. Maybe the coat is giving you COVID. That's what I've learned is that when people get fevers now they just boom you get COVID.
One-to-one
correlation. One to one.
You have to watch this movie because it's insanely cheesy and campy in all the Christmas kitschy ways that we've been talking about in the last 2 episodes of our Christmas series, and yet it is like extremely reverent and sincere, and it's kind of everything that I propose Christmas is.
That's so incredible. I do passionately want them to make like episode 3, which is just like all in Myra. It's just
that'd be amazing.
Just like, guys, whatever. They could have him be like, maybe do it the other way around. Have him be like contemporary hip Santa, only like bro is bishop in Myra. Or
I mean, that's basically what it was in the scene.
Or do a sweet like what is it, 1083 Redux, where like check it, you got a bunch of dudes from Bari in Sicily who like break into Turkish occupied Myra, steal St. Nicholas's body, drag it back to Bari, and then like build a giant church to celebrate. Like, we did it.
And then like squeeze it for baby oil. They sell them all Santas every year.
I feel like we could go any direction from that, like
I mean, that is something that actually happens. The crypt, the supposed crypt of St. Nicholas. I don't believe it's the crypt of St. Nicholas. For any children listening, I believe St. Nicholas is still alive and living in the North Pole. Also, children, if you are listening, you have really bad parents.
Yeah,
and you should
you
turn
have
this
really
off.
bad parents. They are leaving you
Right.
neglect. They're neglecting the podcast
Right.
that you're listening to. Because I mean, I realize kids are way into podcasts. You know, how else are they going to know like what's up with
Yeah,
you
kids
know
are really into
all
podcasts
BBC
on the
things?
arts.
You know, yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
everyone does that.
Yeah, they're
I
into
mean,
psychology, they're into monastic priesthood, and
yeah.
they're listening to this, and they're listening to our swears and our hot
Oh
takes.
my gosh, this
And
swears.
honestly, kids, I admire the nicheness of your interests, but you have bad parents. Anyway, yeah, Santa lives in the North Pole. But if you believe that this is the tomb of Saint Nicholas in Bari, Italy, as you say, the remains kidnapped from Turkey and brought back to Italy in this sort of weird colonist approach to relics, see our relics episode, then yes, they do have semi-annual retreats where mall Santas can go and actually be blessed with an oil that apparently miraculously secretes from the tomb.
Oh my gosh, this is so amazing. This is so
And you can
incredible.
be-
This is so
you can be-
incredible. I
You
love
can
this.
be trained as a mall Santa in the tradition of actual Saint Nicholas on a 1-week Catholic retreat where you
Oh my
learn about
gosh.
Saint Nicholas and you learn how to like, because there's a lot that goes into being like a good mall Santa and answering kids' questions when they ask you like really hard things like, can you cure my cancer for Christmas and stuff like this. And so like there are lots of small ministries and psychological groups that like help Santas to answer those questions. There's like a Santa school in Michigan, I think, like that. But this one is
This is
an explicitly Catholic
This
one.
is so legit. Did you know that the Dominicans run that church? We were given,
Oh,
yeah,
really?
we were given custody of it in like 1950. I mean, it was built in 1087, so like, let's be cool. We have not. That is like 150 years before the Dominicans even existed. But so it's owed and it's really great. But yeah, we
Right,
were.
you guys came in and ran it, but weren't the ones responsible for the colonizing of the relics.
Yes, we probably would have done it if we had thought of it. But somebody else did it first. Okay, is the point.
But you have plausible.
So we have plausible deniability because we
did.
didn't exist yet, you know. So yeah, but we run it now, which means that like maybe Dominicans are actually involved in this like super blessing mall Santa thing, which is just absolute. I love everything about this. This is so incredible.
I met one of the guys who leads the retreat once. My parents got to speak as one of the like big presenters at the World Meeting of Families when Pope Francis did his pity visit to Philadelphia because it's the worst city in America. And my parents spoke there, and one of the people who had like a booth on the trade show floor of this big expo was, I believe, a Byzantine priest who like does a whole Saint Nicholas ministry where he actually like plays Saint Nicholas in traveling performances and video calls and stuff like that.
Seems
And I think
legit.
he just did like a weird Santa retreat with Scott Hahn somewhere in California.
Yeah, I'm open to all of that.
Yeah. This is like the world is very weird and the Catholic world is much
weirder. And you
the
just,
last
like-
5 minutes I think proved
Yeah,
that.
you just have to accept it, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of bad Netflix movies for Christmas, I found
Yeah.
out a few weeks ago that a high school classmate of mine is like in one of these Netflix specials.
Oh, which one?
Yeah, Love.
Oh my gosh.
Love Hard.
Love.
Yeah.
Are you sure that's a Netflix special, not a Pornhub
I know
special?
it's yes. Yes, I know it sounds like that. It was one of these like whatever sort of like mid ticket movies released around like or maybe on Thanksgiving or something like that. It is intentionally supposed to be a combination of Love Actually and Die Hard by the title.
Oh, that's
By
incredible.
the title, and then the plot is just you're totally predictable. Oh my gosh, like I want to love the hunky dude, but actually maybe I'm gonna love the kind of like nerdy dude who's got like a soul and all this kind of. Isn't that great? Anyway, like one of my high school classmates who's an actress is in it, and it's like, okay, there it is. So
Dude, we should have her on the podcast, and we can talk about my theory that all sort of Hallmarkish Christmas movies are actually Marxist propaganda.
that would be really great. I'm not going to say anything more
Like,
about
I'm actually
it.
serious.
I'm
We
not
should
going to say any
maybe
more about
consider
it
having this person on
because
there.
because I don't want to say anything that poison the well when her PR people listen to this. But that would be really great.
Yeah, no, I would actually love to do that. That would be really fun. I want to eventually pivot this podcast into a place where we're interviewing artists on a semi-regular basis. I still want to do most of the episodes just you and I, but like every third episode I want to be interviewing an artist, but not an artist most people would ever be interested in hearing from. Like I don't want to do like, oh, like this amazing Christian singer or something like that. Like those people, like screw those people. I want to do like this guy makes mosaics out of bottles that he found, and this girl is in Hallmark Christmas movies, and this dude leads retreats for mall Santas. And like that's the kind of shit I want to be doing on this program.
Yeah, that would be beautiful. That would be so beautiful. Oh man.
But speaking of the weird stuff that we want to be covering, I mean, I'm kind of proud of us. As I mentioned in our first Christmas episode of this season, we kind of crapped the bed on the Halloween series we wanted to do because I encountered some personal life struggles with the move.
Dun. Personal life struggles.
But we actually have done it. This is the third episode in our Christmas series and the final episode in our Christmas series. And we're devoting this episode to the subject of nativity scenes. Crèches, as they're sometimes called, Principios, as they're sometimes called. We're talking about the history of the nativity scene and all those sorts of things there. There's a lot of, I think people just imagine the nativity scene as sort of this cute, static thing that's always been the way it is. But there are a lot of weird offshoots of nativity scenes.
Oh, yeah.
There are a lot of versions of nativity scenes. There's kind of a weird history behind nativity scenes. And I feel like it's a really good topic for this podcast because we're all about faith, but we're also all about the arts, and we're also about goofy, weird, silly stuff that might have deeper meaning. And all of that is in these nativity scenes. So I'm curious. I have some thoughts on kind of, I guess we both did our own independent research on different things here that we wanted to talk about today. But to sort of get this off the ground, let's start this off as we often start off these podcasts, talking about our own personal experience of things. So I'm going to ask you this question. I'm going to give you a minute to think about it. Do you remember your first nativity scene? And what do you remember most about it, for good or ill?
Well, my parents would. My mom would always put up for Christmas, like a big part of the Christmas decorations that would go up on like the day after Thanksgiving every year. It would be like, she had what she called like her village. So you know those things, the like little porcelain or whatever they are. Yeah. And so she'd like do it all up and have all these things, and it was all sweet. And she had like a little mirror that she'd put as like an ice rink, and it was all like very sort of homegrown and fabulous, and it was great. And like, so there was that, and then with that was like a little kind of plasticky doll, well, not doll, but like a little plastic figurine nativity set. They were not. Yeah, they were not together because the village people, that's right, I said the village people, were significantly smaller, and they were made of like porcelain or other objects, Anyway, so
those classic nativity figures, the shepherd, the wise man,
the construction worker,
the Indian, the police officer.
Exactly. Yes.
God, I want this to be a thing so much.
You know what? The village people got too much play already. I want them to get. I want them to enter no more territory where they are not already.
No, we need to do a choral Christmas Gregorian chant cover of YMCA.
Okay, now that I would accept.
And that can accompany this scene.
Yeah. Okay. I would accept.
Man.
Yeah. That. Yes. That. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, good. I accept that.
All right, perfect.
I could
podcast.
We exactly, and done. We could translate it into Latin. It'd be awesome.
I would love that.
Juvenis. Anyway, as you go. But yeah, and so there was this like a little like home nativity scene that was of course always the same. I mean, I hope they still have it. What if they got rid of it? My life would be over. But it's sweet. It's just this little thing, and the wise men were, the one with black skin had a purple robe
Always.
that was fabulous. Yes, obviously it has to be purple because he's black. Just don't think about that too hard. And then the two white ones were blue and green, And like,
So did you have two white ones, or did you have? Because in most modern nativity sets I've seen, I say modern, I mean like the 70s sort of Fontanini movement. One wise man is black and he's wearing purple. One wise man is white and he's wearing green. But then the blue wise man is always like Asian.
he's like he's Chinese. I don't think that was the case here. I don't remember. No.
Okay.
Maybe.
Which I think is an interesting thing. They're like, we have three wise men. They're like exotic, so we should give them the three races that exist.
Yeah.
There are no other races.
No, I mean, well, listen, there's only three. Okay. So,
right. There's only three wise men. The Bible never actually says there's just three, but we are sure there's only three, and we're sure they were black, white, and Asian.
Yeah. I mean,
and these were the colors they wore.
After like 1975, like 100% we're sure that. Absolutely everybody knows it. No, this is, but this is what's funny. I'm glad you bring that up because like every single Christmas and like every single Easter or like in the weeks leading up to it, one of these debacle cable channels from the 90s, like the Discovery Channel or the History Channel, will have some kind of thing like, did you know everything you know about Christmas is wrong, sort of specials. And they'll be like, Jesus wasn't born in a stable, he was born in a cave, like all this like kind of dumb stuff, and be like,
yeah,
whatever. But it's like, okay, yeah, I mean, all right. Like whatever. I mean, it's adding a bunch of drama to something that's not super dramatic, but like, yeah. But again, like everyone kind of, as you say, in a very mediocre way, takes for granted that like the Magi wore like blue, green, and purple, and that they're black, possibly Asian, and possibly indiscriminately white,
and that they were kings, which they certainly were not,
and that they were kings, and like, and all this kind of stuff. And it's like everyone just kind of takes that for granted. That's fine. And like, these are not things that necessarily, I mean, the king part, sure, but like the rest of it, these are not things that people would have per se said earlier. Although there's one of my very favorite depictions of the adoration of the Magi is from this 15th or 16th century, I forget, Flemish painter named Roger van de Weyden, that does, in fact, it's like everything about it is amazing, and it has the wise men facing that they're looking at the star, and in the star is the baby Jesus, which is a certain tradition of thought and depiction of the star, that the star itself was already like, because it's
awesome.
signaling Christ, like the star itself is already Christ, and so it's bringing them to him.
That is super
absolutely amazing. And one of them is black, and I think maybe the other two were just indiscriminate white people. One
of them is a discriminate white person. Super racist.
Fact. That's right. One of them is indiscriminately white, and one of them is discriminately white. And that way, it's a kind of diversity, I guess.
A diversity of white
yeah
people.
Exactly. Well, listen, if you're Roger van de Weyden and you live in like, I always forget, like 1480s or something, the Low Countries, like I mean, it's a major trading place, but like, how many people have you seen from the world? Hard to say.
There you go. Like I said, podcast over.
Yeah.
That's something to talk about. I also have a favorite depiction of the wise men, but I feel like it's a hotter thing that we need to kind of work up to in this episode.
Okay, wow.
So I'm gonna save it.
Wow.
Because we're gonna get into, like, per the intro that I posed, we're gonna get into a lot of the weird offshoots and nativities. I will sort of preview though my experience in nativity saying my grandmother. Why did I say it like that? My grandmother made the nativity set I grew up with.
Wow.
It's very, I mean, it's very shiny and 70s.
Yes.
But it's like literally 300 pounds. Because it's like cast resin, and then she painted it and fired it.
Wow.
And so like I literally could not like collectively all the figures together are probably like 300 pounds. It's like a ridiculous and it's so big. And I was just obsessed with the camel.
Yeah, that's
like most children.
Yeah. The camel is real.
Obsessed with the camel.
Oh man, yeah, me too.
The donkey too, but the camel, and gosh, my first foray, as it is for many people in nativity, was just being like, this animal thing is badass. I really really
I
like
just
this.
love that there's something happening here that involves camels and a lot of
Yeah, it's like a
camels
little
and
zoo.
like it's like a little zoo that you play with and like in the middle of it's a baby and baby, but like
Yeah,
fundamentally
baby. I
camels.
kind of right. Camels at a birthday. I want camels at my
Yeah,
birthday.
I
That's
mean,
awesome.
yeah, I guess my parents never loved me that much, but there it is.
Right. Yeah. Not as much as Mary and Joseph loved Jesus, I guess.
Mm,
They got him camels for
that's
his
sad. Yeah,
birthday.
they did. They did that. They did.
They're like that. They're like those LA parents who like have a pony at every birthday party, and you're like, why would you give your kid a pony for their birthday? Now I have to get my kid a pony for their birthday. Like Mary and Joseph were just these yuppie parents who are like, we got a camel for Jesus. He's honor roll, so we just thought he deserved
Just
it.
everybody needs a little camel, and these other people they just showed up, but that's cool.
Oh my gosh. So how familiar are you with nativity history? Because I'm sort of familiar with the history of like the physical figures and a lot of those kind of folk customs. How like what's your purview of knowledge here with the history of this?
Early art history, so like beginning art historical depictions of the nativity, and then like where we get to the Crèche with Franciscan cosplay stuff. So like medieval stuff. Those are the things I know most about.
Perfect. Well, and that's like right after Franciscan cosplay stuff is where my info picks up. So why don't you tell me about this? Because I don't know much about the early stuff at all. I come in very much like post Middle Ages folk customs.
Sure.
So,
Yeah. So, just real briefly talking about the really early stuff. We have depictions of the nativity are pretty early. We have a couple of surviving ones from the late 4th century. That's not. I mean, that's not crazy wingman wand diggity early. That's a unit of earliness. Because like the earliest Christian art we're gonna have is like end of the 2nd century, beginning of the 3rd century, basically. But
sure.
but you get.
Although I will say, oh, go ahead. No, you're fine. I'm sorry.
So you just that you have you get a couple of their sarcophagi that have like clearly Jesus wrapped in very very funeral band like swaddling clothes lying on top of an altar that is also a sarcophagus that is also a crib kind of and there'll be like the ox and the ass on either side.
Okay.
So you get that like that tableau is like from right away. You will more often end up seeing like the adoration, like the scene that we would call the adoration of the Magi. So you'll get moving forward for a while, like you'll get a number of like adoration of the Magi type scenes. And in fact, it does seem like for a while, maybe 150 years or so, the primary kind of visual way of communicating the force of the incarnation, that like the word has become flesh and dwelt among us, is this kind of adoration of the Magi type scene. Sometimes, just very rarely, it's this like Christ. What's interesting about the very first ones, particularly one of them, I forget the second one, but certainly the first one, is there's nobody else on the scene. It's just this Christ child wrapped in funereal swaddling bands with the ox and the ass on either side of his place of repose. And there's nobody else, so you don't see Mary, Joseph, etc. Of course, they come.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Because again, it's highlighting. You see very much this is the man who's born to die, right? Like he's the connection right away with the grave, with the resurrection. So with the cross, with the resurrection, with the resuscitation of Lazarus, and then with the resurrection of Christ, and the 3 days spent in the tomb. Like all of this is very, very, very dramatically present there. But then because of the ox and the ass, which of course are here's my History Channel moment, not actually in the Gospels. Oh my gosh, your faith is a lie. They're from prophetic texts in the Old Testament.
Sure.
And so the ox and the ass there represent both the Jewish people and then all peoples of the world, knowing their master, it says, and knowing their master and worshiping him. So it represents both the Jewish people and then all the peoples of the world coming to worship God. And in the Old Testament prophecies, it's a kind of like apocalyptic thing, like that. This is like the fulfillment of all things, is when like everybody would come and know who their master is and adore and worship him. And so putting that in the Nativity right away is this very clear sign, like, yep, this is the one. We're not waiting for anybody else.
And there's an earthiness to that too. I mean, we've talked a lot about the incarnation, that is God becoming man, Christ being this very oddly physical thing, odd within the space of sort of world religions, this oddly physical thing, where there's, he spits in people's eyes and cures people with mud in their ears, and, is just, and that earthiness, I think is pretty poignant in even the earliest nativities, and the ox and the ass are a big part of this. Are you saying though, and because I didn't know the whole Jews and Gentiles thing with the ox and the ass, is one specifically relegated to each, or is it just generally representative of, like, are Jews the donkey, or like what is that?
I think it's
artistically,
to the best of my knowledge, right at this moment, I think it's generic. Just like this represents all people coming to Christ.
Okay. Okay. I was just curious.
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge right now, I could be wrong. But I've forgotten if it's more specific than that. But yeah, and so in a sense, you could say like, well, maybe that's all the people you need, is because then you have all the people of the world come to adore Christ. But then, like, naturally, you also want to have like the first and primary worshiper, Mary, and then like the other first and just after the primary worshiper, Joseph, and like all of this, and then you get kind of all the rest,
Yeah,
which all has its own whole fascinating history of how the rest of it develops. But that is how it starts, and it is just saying this is a really, 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 really important image for it's a kind of handy single image summary of all of our Christian hope, right? So like, it's weird. Like, remember, like, this is just put on, like, the first one that we have from, it's like the late 4th century, 380, something like that. It's on a sarcophagus, so like, it's not because like bro died during Christmas time and like OMG. It's although by that time in Rome, Christmas would have been being celebrated on December 25th. But it's, highly unlikely it has anything to do with the time that this person died. It's because it's a one image summary of everything that Christians believe.
That's really powerful.
Yeah.
I know I'm going to distract from the powerfulness of this by saying this, but this is just an interesting factoid that relates. This is what I was going to say when I so rudely interrupted you a minute ago. But you mentioned that this is in the, what you said, the 400s? This is the image that's showing up?
Late 4th century, so like 380s or so.
Okay. So late 380s, this nativity is showing up. By the late 400s, Saint Nicholas as a pseudo Santa figure, we have anthropological and archaeological evidence that was already happening. And I think that's super interesting because there's recorded evidence, and I don't have a citation for this, that there was a convent, an orphanage run by a convent, where they actually did give presents to kids on St. Nicholas Day in his name as early as like the early 500s.
Oh, well, yeah,
late 400s, early 500s, and there's a miracle of a sailor who fell off a boat and was drowning and claimed to have been rescued by a flying Saint Nicholas.
Oh,
around that time
that
as well.
Stuff is really common. I mean, Saint Nicholas is like, again, we just think like, oh, like, did you know Santa Claus is Saint Nicholas, etc., or vice versa, but like, Saint Nicholas is the biggest of big deals. I mean, he is the biggest of big deals. Everyone, particularly in the Greek speaking church, forever, he is just a really, really, really big deal. He starts to be a bigger deal. I mean, he's always a big deal in the West as well, but not as big of a deal. He becomes a bigger deal in the West after after some publicly minded, good doers from Bari go to a place where his bones are being held in bondage, and they
Definitely not pirates.
and they liberate him, and they bring him to where he can be appropriately reverenced, and that just happens to be in like a whole different country, and then they just happen to build like one of Western Europe's most important pilgrimage destinations over his bones.
And again, I'm sorry to distract from the nativity thing. I just find this interesting that because we do, and this has been an ongoing point of discussion in all 3 of the episodes on Christmas, which are independent of each other, and you don't, if you're listening now, have to listen to any of those. They probably suck. But I just think it's interesting, sort of anthropologically, that like within a century of the nativity scene showing up, some kind of cultural celebration of Santa is also showing up. And I think it's interesting how far back those traditions are sort of linked arm in arm.
Sure. Yeah.
So that was just my little silly songs with Larry interruption in the broader narrative of this podcast.
Sure.
But I thought I'd throw it in. Could you elaborate? Oh, go ahead.
No, that's it. Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say, could you elaborate for us though? Back to the main subject line. When you say, I mean, I think I know what you mean when you say that this image is a perfect image of just everything Christians believe, but I imagine, and maybe this is dumb of me, but I imagine there are some people who would be surprised by that, because like the de facto logo for Christianity is the cross.
Right.
Like when you think of Christianity as a thing, you don't think of the nativity scene. You think of that as a Christmas thing. You think of the cross as why would you say, like, elaborate on why you think that's a perfect sort of microcosm of everything that Christianity is.
Right. So, well, first let me point out that that we find these images before we find images of the cross. So, prescinding from a couple of sort of like outlier examples, the earliest extant cross, like crucifix that we have, image of Christ stretched out as if on a cross. The earliest one is from it's this Maskell ivory casket, which is from like 431 to 433 ish. And then the second earliest one is on the doors of Santa Sabina, also run by the Dominicans. P.S. Although that's kind of OG, that's been for a long time. And that's from like 434 ish. So those are the earliest depicted crucifixes that we have, or crosses, Christ on the cross. And then like kind of the next big one, if I'm remembering correctly, is in like 586, which is in a manuscript. Actually one of the most stunning crucifixion scenes you'll ever seen. It's from Edessa in Syria, monastery of Saint John of Zagba in Edessa in Syria, and it was just this absolutely insanely, amazingly beautiful crucifixion. But anyway, so just to say that, like, one of the great puzzles of Christian art history, and we should probably have a whole episode to talk about this because it's so cool, is like, why does the cross develop so slowly as a kind of iconography? Because like now you think like, well, that's just the thing, but it's built slowly, and
save that shiznit for our Good Friday episode.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, girl.
This is the Christmas episode.
Yeah, focus. So so for, more than a generation, 2 generations about, extant, like stuff that we have extant. Who knows what the stuff on the ground was, but one of the major go-to images for expressing everything would be the nativity. And then this, so like, why is this so complete? Well, remember that there are aspects to this nativity that are a little bit, you can find them in Renaissance and some post-Renaissance, but especially Renaissance and some earlier nativity scenes, but it's not going to be perhaps as likely. So, for instance, like that Christ is in swaddling clothes. Okay, so like some depictions of the Nativity, Christ will be in swaddling clothes. Most of them, especially from like Renaissance on, because they want to show off like how naturalistically they can paint and like, oh my gosh, look at this baby. He's got like all the chubby baby stuff, you know. So they're gonna show like chubby baby arms all waving, and it's gonna be adorable and like, you know, so
little Bua Jesus.
Exactly, like so like that's very commonly going to be the case. Or think you're kind of like standard kind of suburban like baby Jesus, who's like just kind of tucked up with a little like blankie around under his chin, you know, kind of like
right. But this is a hardcore like half mummified. They're
really supposed to look like burial cloths. They really are supposed to look like burial cloths. So it's a 100% visual correlation between Christ's birth and Christ's burial. That is a 100% visual correlation. Sometimes even the baby is like kind of confusingly between being a baby and being like an adult, which is something you see. Sometimes you see in various ways. Again, not because they didn't know how to paint babies or carve babies or whatever, but because they're making a theological point, you know, that he's whatever. They're making a number of theological points. So there's that, that the manger is going to look probably a whole lot more. The manger is going to look a whole lot more like a sarcophagus or an altar or both, highlighting the priestly aspect of this, the sacrificial aspect of this. Again, that he's born to die, and that he's not just born to die because we got to get him out of the way, but because like his death is sacrificial and then is given to human beings on the altar, and that like this is how we enter into all of it. And then because you have the ox and the ass, then you know that this is something not just for like every now and then, or like for some people who are like super special, but that is proposed for all of humanity to come to worship. And that first, but then also first and also last. All of that means that this is actually God. You know, this isn't just like some random interesting figure or like a great teacher like Buddha and like Mahatma Gandhi.
Jesus was such a good teacher, just like a good guy.
Just a great guy. I think he just really wanted us to be nice to each other, and like I think probably love each other. As long as by love each other we mean kind of be nice and then like just do the things I want to do anyway. Yeah. No, right. So all of that, you know, I think is like it's all involved there. So I would say like, well, what's a nice handy one image summary of it? Like it's pretty much, it's going to be as good as you can get, you know. It's not the earliest Christian image to try to summarize kind of everything, but it's certainly like it's one that has long legs that goes for a long time.
This is another one of those things that I'm going to kind of throw in as a monkey wrench that might threaten to undermine the conversation, but I really like it. I don't watch the show Family Guy very often because I don't think it's very funny. I'm more of a South Park guy, but they did a Christmas episode a couple of years ago that was their take on the story of the birth of Christ.
Oh man,
with their characters recast as the different characters, and most of it is if you know, offensive, but lamely so, not in any kind of a clever way. But
yeah, that's my association with Family Guy.
They did accidentally though, and I this was purely accidental, but they did very accidentally they sort of stumbled into recreating this artistic tradition of baby born to die, because Stewie is the baby Jesus, of course, and he's sitting there, and Brian, the dog, who in this is now a sheep, offers him like, I think like a sandwich or something right after he's born. And he's like, oh no, I'm kind of trying to watch my figure for the thing. And it and I just loved that, like, there, you know, the baby is watching his abs because he wants to look good for the crucifixion later on. But there was sort of this funny thing where I was watching it going, yeah, sort of offensive, but also they don't know that they just kind of inadvertently represented one of the oldest artistic traditions in regards to the Nativity.
It is true. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Even Family Guy can occasionally say something interesting, it turns out.
Yeah. Everyone's a broken clock's right twice a day.
Yeah, exactly. We're just gonna say actually Family Guy might only be right once a day. I don't know how they manage it, but it's only once a day, in fact.
Yeah, once a year. But no, I found that point kind of cool. So the ox and the ass are like there from the very beginning. And at what point does this become more of a concentration of like the Holy Family of like Mary and Joseph and Jesus, and that's that part of it?
I mean,
because I will say it seems like the Nativity, the story of the history of the Nativity is also the story of the history of the growth of the Nativity. Like by the time my sort of purview for knowledge picks up, there are about 1,000 characters in the Nativity. And I think it's interesting that the first two characters are this cow and this donkey, and then other characters are being added on, standard deviations, like, degrees of Kevin Bacon outwards throughout the centuries. So at what point in your understanding do different figures start to join, and that scene becomes elaborated into the primary sort of microcosmic one that we know now with a couple of shepherds and the wise men and the Mary and the Joseph?
Yeah, I actually don't know when that specific tableau starts. I mean, it's not a straight line growth. Like first you've got the ox and the ass, then you've got Mary, then you've got Joseph, then you've got like shepherds, then you've got then you've got like magi or whatever. It's because so first you have the ox and the ass, and I think the second one just has Mary and Jesus. I don't think it has Joseph. Joseph again, like he becomes important in these scenes, but his role is often a little bit. It will often be a little bit surprising for a contemporary person who is like, I think mercifully starting to become used to thinking of Joseph as like an active role in salvation history and like a real human being and like all this kind of stuff. But like, anyway, so he's often going to be in the background if he's there at all. And again, like, and then you're going to like pretty much right away get the magi. And then like conflation of the scene with the shepherds that comes, but like, again, it's not really, as far as I understand it, like a straight line growth, just like, well, you see this and then you see these characters and then you see these characters. Certainly by the time you get to the High Renaissance, it's like, OMG. Who invited everybody? Yeah. It's like
call everyone you've ever met. We're having a birthday.
Yes, exactly. It's absolutely amazing. But
is it just a significance? Like is the significance the fact that these are the only art forms we have left over, or is there a further kind of theological significance to the fact that the earliest representations, because I noticed you mentioned this even in regards to the cross, that the earliest representations of these things that we're seeing are on caskets?
Well, that's just because like funerary art is basically where most of our earliest church art comes from.
Just because that's what lasts, or because of the significance of Christian burial?
Mostly just because of what we have. I mean, all this stuff was underground. Like the basically the funerary stuff will have been underground because the catacombs were underground in Rome. For instance. So
it's just preserved better than the other stuff. It's just preserved
better. I mean, sarcophagi, like those things are solid, So like those things, I mean, that's like a big hunk of marble, That's gonna be held up pretty okay. And then there's some accidental survivals. Like there's this really, really important place in Syria called Dora Europos that has the very first the very earliest surviving house church that was buried in this gigantic the Romans had the town for about 100 years, and then they lost it when they were all killed, and like the town was totally destroyed in 256. And like that,
it happens.
That happens, But that house church was just like literally buried overnight, and so it like was super well preserved, and so it has like art in it and stuff like that. And so like for non-funereal context, but for non-funereal context stuff, like really early on, like 3rd century, early 4th century, we have very little. Like basically all like everything that we see is going to be from a funeral context.
Okay.
And that's just
So
accidents of survival, just accidents of survival.
So you're filling in a lot of gaps for me in my understanding of this. So at what point then, like, what's the next big stage in the, you know, Darwinian evolution of the nativity scene at that point?
In a big jump? Well, I do just want to point out really briefly that like where this happens is wildly and amazingly variable, right? So like where does this happen? You definitely get representations in a cave. Right, so like this becomes in like Eastern iconographic tradition, even from pretty early on. I think maybe even like the 7th, 8th century, if I'm remembering correctly. You get very clearly in a cave, and so like that's cool. But then also you get these these visual representations in a house, in a stable. I mean, it's a house. I mean, like a stable, really. And then in some kind of a building sometimes. And then you get these really great ones inside a ruined pagan temple, which is awesome.
Oh.
Those are really boss. That's because of a specific medieval legend that it's a specific medieval legend about a specific I think a Sibylline oracle, one of the oracles anyway, that at the time they thought was like pre-Christian, but turned out to be actually post-Christian. But anyway, that where it was said, so in Rome, there was this big, beautiful temple built to Minerva. And it was said that this temple that there was a prophecy that this temple would stand until a virgin gave birth. And so everyone was like, oh, good. So it'll be here forever because it's so great. And then the night that Mary gave birth, the whole thing fell tumbling down. You know, and that's why like we have this church now that the PS Dominicans run. It's a theme called Santa Maria Sopra Minerva, like Holy Mary guys, on Minerva, on top of Minerva.
You guys might run too many things.
Nah, bro, it's cool. Don't worry about it. They're ours. They're ours. Back off, buddy. Back off. You can't have them.
We don't want to have to come to your country and steal your bones and bring them back someplace.
We might have to. It would be a real shame if one of your feet ended up in Florence and then your head ended up in Siena. Wouldn't it be a real shame?
It'd be a real shame if your eyes ended up in Poland. Wouldn't you hate to see it?
And then the rest of you was still here, you know? Exactly. So you get all these wild and crazy things because again, it's just like super important. These are never trying to depict historical circumstance. They are always trying to depict like the incarnation. They're trying to depict the nativity. You know, they're not trying to say like, did you know it was actually the kind of unseasonably warm that year? And so like, that's why they're not really wearing heavy coats. And like, no, I mean, like they're trying to depict the nativity of the Lord, the word become flesh.
Right. They're trying to depict the spiritual truth, the existential truth more than they're trying to create a documentary.
Yeah, exactly. And so like, so it's just like super great because you see all these really wildly variable things and you just have to be like, yeah, all those are true. All those are true. Just deal with it.
You're explaining the significance of it being in this temple over Minerva, but you also mentioned that it's in these stables and these caves. Am I to infer that like that is because that's where the event is also set? Like Jesus is born in a cave, born in a stable, so therefore we're gonna like put depictions of that in a cave and in a stable, or is that just coincidental?
Yeah. So I mean, because it's not really clear in the. I mean, it's not clear in the biblical text like where exactly where it is, right? But it's like, well, there's animals there and like, okay, so like that's where you have animals and
laid in a manger, so
laid in a manger, you know, so like okay, so it has to be somewhere where we're going to keep animals. Like, well, where do you keep animals? Well, depending on where you live, you're going to keep your animals. If you're out with your flock or whatever, you're going to keep your animals in like a stable, or you're going to find a cave and you're going to keep them in the cave. You know,
Yeah.
so it just depends where you live and like what's kind of intuitive for
Right. So this is an artistic inference where we're saying, okay, where would a manger, that is to say a feed box, be? And we're sort of extrapolating that artistically from that
Yeah,
starting point.
and then like naturally, as you would expect, like really robust theological ideas come out of that, right? So like then there becomes this really incredibly beautiful theological formulation that like oh gosh, I'm afraid I'm blanking on who first says this, but that then you have this idea that Christ is born in a cave that had never seen the light. That's like the darkest cave that has ever been, like Mammoth Cave in Kentucky or something. That like is born in the darkest cave that had never seen the light in the depths of the earth, which again is like hell, right? Like that's
Sure.
medieval imagination, and or you know early pre-medieval imagination, and that there the light of the world is born. You know, the light of the world shines
That's
forth.
pretty
So
awesome.
that like, so again, which is stunning, right? That like, you know, people will say things like, you know, when this some terrible tragedy happens around Christmas, and they'd be like, oh my gosh, you know, it just doesn't seem like Christmas this year because of like this, or maybe we shouldn't celebrate Christmas this year because of this terrible tragedy or whatever, and realize like, no, that's exactly wrong. Like Christ is born, the greatest light, the only true light, the only true hope in the deepest darkness that could never have imaginably seen light, and that's where he's born.
Yeah, this is kind of the whole point. And then on top of that, there's of course an artistic, Eucharistic thing being done. You know, homage being done where, you know, we believe when we receive the Eucharist, we are actually consuming the body and blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. And here, this little baby Jesus is being laid in a feed box, to be eaten.
Yeah.
And so that very early becomes this like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. He's being put in a feed box and we're going to eat him later. That's amazing.
It's amazing. So yeah, so you'll have him like lying on sheafs of wheat, or they'll have like stalks of wheat sticking out of the box, you know, even if the box might look super duper sarcophagus like, it will have, or altar like, it will have like wheat sticking out or something like that. So like totally, absolutely, like super duper Eucharistic all at the same time.
Shredded wheat, frosted wheat.
One of the friars in his 90s who lives in my house is 100% blind, like 100% blind, and so people have to help him with things, as you might imagine. And in the morning, when he wants to be given a bowl of frosted mini wheats, TM, he asks for, quote, pillows.
Oh, buddy.
Which is amazing.
That's the cutest thing I've ever heard. He's super cute.
He's the least cute friar you could possibly imagine in your
don't
entire
ruin
life.
this for me.
No, that's what makes it better. Like, this is actually how Dominicans work. He is absolutely not a cute man. But he calls frosted mini wheats pillows, which is just, there it is. You just got to live with it. That's the most amazing
God
thing.
bless him.
Yeah. Yeah. So like you kind of get all that. Do you want to talk about St. Francis? We should probably talk about St. Francis because
we should probably get to St. Francis.
Let's get to St. Francis. Otherwise, I'm going to get so distracted with this. Like, we won't ever get to him. Like, so, okay. So here's the deal. Like, we think like, why is St. Francis involved in this at all? So St. Francis moves this from the realm of like art history, to like the material world, to like the like physical, touchable, tangible, like he moves it into the metaverse. Look, he does it. He moves it into the physical real world. And he does it like this. So this is super early. We have a super early record of this. So Francis of Assisi dies in 1226. His first biographer writes his biography in like 1228. It's confirmed in 1229.
And give us the baseball stats of who St. Francis is for those people who don't know.
St. Francis is the guy that your grandma has holding a bird feeder in front of her house. He's wearing brown, and he might be like weirdly wearing kind of like lipstick if the statue's from the 70s, because they're very sappy. But so he's the founder of the order known as the Franciscans, the order of Friars Minors, Friars Minor, who is this preaching friar, preaching and friar whose great love is for poverty, right? And so he found Franciscan order, which is like the biggest thing since sliced bread. Like from the second that it takes off, like second that it gets started, it's go crazy.
Super intense mofo.
Super intense dude. He is an intense bro, and
like does not have a medium setting. Like he is hot or he is cold, and I mean that literally, because he's like throwing himself into giant piles of snow sometimes just to make a point. And like lying there naked to piss people off, and like taking off all his clothes and standing there naked in front of his dad and being like, "Screw you, Dad, you don't own me." Just a very
I mean, we've all
guy.
done that latter one, but yeah, exactly.
Right. I mean, who doesn't remember the point at which they came of age by standing naked in front of their father, saying, "You don't own me,"
in the town square, and having the bishop be the guy who drapes his cloak around you, and like nobody sues anybody. You know, nobody sued anybody after that happened. Actually, hashtag not true, because his dad sued Francis because of
oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, or the bishop kind of. Anyway, because Francis had sold a bunch of cloth that didn't technically belong to him. It did technically belong to his dad, and his dad wanted the money for it. I don't remember how that resolved, but anyway, so that's who he is. He has this really, 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 really intense love for the incarnate Christ, and particularly for the baby Jesus. Really intense. So people who know him, so like, again, like this first biography is written 2 years after he died from people who know him, right? So this first biography by this guy named Thomas of Solano. This stuff is really like as close to kind of like eyewitness reporting as you're ever going to get in the Middle Ages, basically. So here's how he reports it. He says 3 years before he dies, which, because 1226, probably 1223. He says 3 years before he dies, he goes up to this little town that's like, I forget, some way north of Rome, called Greccio. He has this friend named John, whom he always spends Christmas with, and he's like, John, like, here, I've got this idea. Here's what I want you to do. It's gonna be amazing. You're gonna love it. And he says, this is a quote from what Francis tells the guy. He says, I wish to enact the memory of that babe who was born in Bethlehem, to see as much as is possible with my own bodily eyes the discomfort of his infant needs, how he lay in a manger, and how with an ox and an ass standing by he rested on hay. So this guy does it. They like get animals, hay, like the whole situation, and like they're doing this, and apparently it's outside. It's a little bit, I mean, you know, you look at like the way that the text is described. The forest amplifies the cries, and the boulders echo back the joyful crowd. The brothers sing, giving God due praise, and the whole night abounds with jubilation. The holy man of God stands before the manger, filled with heartfelt sighs. Okay, they celebrate Mass, like wherever this is held. It kind of seems like it's outside. Over the manger, it says, the solemnities of the Mass are celebrated, and the priest enjoys a new consolation. So there's something. So what they do is they hold you could just be upfront. They hold a living nativity scene. Now, we're not talking people here. There don't appear to be people involved, but there are animals. There is hay. It seems to be outside. Everyone is jamming out there. They're having Mass in the middle of this.
It's so awesome.
It is so intense. Like, this is not, like, there's nothing domesticated about this. And this is, I have a second more to say about this, one or two more things to say about this. But in short, this is where the Crèche comes from. This is where the Crèche comes from. Like, this is where it becomes a three-dimensional living object that is going to be like not just a carving on something, a frieze or whatever. It's not just a painting. It's not just an illuminated manuscript. But it's like this whole physical thing where like realism, physical material realism is a big concern. You know, you have hay, you have oxen, you have donkeys, you have like sheep, you have a manger, you have everything, you know? And like, this is wherever you're saying Mass, you have all of this.
Well, and I, you know, we have talked before about how my particular love and also my professional aspiration is artistically anyway, is within the sort of subgenre of what's called themed entertainment, which is immersive design that you would associate with like a Disney park, or you'd associate maybe with a children's museum or a family entertainment center,
Or like the Santa Baby pop-up bar.
or like the Santa Baby pop-up bar, where there is a, it's a lived experience.
Right.
There is a themed experience with immersive elements, and this is kind of a very early proto version of that in a Christian context, where like you are experiencing both the pantomime of the thing in the form of, here are these animals, here's this manger, and also the reality of the thing, because we as Catholics believe that the Eucharist is Christ, and so the incarnation is happening there. So you're having the Eucharist there, and then you're having like live animals, and you as a person are sort of walking through this in this early proto like theme park immersive experience, which I think is, as an artist and as a Catholic, I think that's freaking awesome.
It's pretty boss. There's if you want to talk about it again sometime, there is a lot to be said about that with pilgrimage art, things related to pilgrimages, and where you do like simulacra of pilgrimages in other places, so this ends up becoming a really, really, really big deal earlier than we're talking right now, because St. Francis is right at the beginning of the 13th century, which is like pretty late actually. So that stuff, that kind of that thing you're talking about, that starts actually much earlier, but it is wild to hear this like with the Nativity, and again, like at Mass, like it's like, oh my gosh, I'm of the age where like I remember like before I was Catholic, even with like the Catholic school I went to, when I was a little kid, all these like really embarrassing little kid kind of Christmas masses where, it's like Jesus is basically not on the scene, like you say the prayers of the Mass like kind of embarrassed, because really the whole point is like, oh look, these little kids and they're this, and like, oh my gosh,
Sure.
And so I'm thinking like, normally I would think, oh my gosh, like doing this kind of play acting in the presence of Mass, like, oh my gosh, I roll my eyes, but this is a real deal. And now, this is a real deal. No, it's not play acting. I mean, he wants to see it with his own eyes.
Right.
He wants it to be
to
so
get as
real,
close to the thing as the real thing as it possibly can be.
Yeah.
There's like there's a real emphasis on not cuteness or twee, but on artistic authenticity.
Yeah. Super immense.
And I'm glad you mentioned this word simulacrum, which of course is versus simulation. Could you just, because I want to make a point about that, could you define those two terms really quickly?
So a simulacrum is just it's an ersatz version of something else, so it's you just have a likeness, an imitated likeness in some other mode, right? So whether it's a representation of a person or this,
because simulation is a representation, but simulacrum, isn't that a representation of something that might not actually, like a simulation is a recreation of something that exists, and a simulacrum is a recreation of something that might not exist, but it's like a deeper reality, right?
I've never heard that distinction. I mean, I don't, the words don't inherently mean that, but like I would accept that as a helpful working technical distinction. Sure.
That's how I was introduced to it in my artistic education, when we were studying kind of themed entertainment and that sort of thing.
Okay.
Like if I simulate, like if I go to Epcot, the Disney park Epcot, and I go to like the Pavilion of Italy, that's a simulation of a real place in Italy. Like it's supposed to look like Venice, and it's doctored to sort of represent that as accurately as possible. So that's a simulation. A simulacrum is if I go to, and again, I'm using the Disney analogies because I'm fresh off of it. I just did the Disney Christmas stuff last weekend. But if you go to like the Magic Kingdom, that's a representation of like this fairy tale reality that didn't exist, but represents like a deeper truth. And so that would be like a simulacrum.
Oh,
right?
interesting.
But,
yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, no,
right.
that's
So
a
anyway,
helpful distinction. Yeah.
The reason I bring this up or touch on this deeper, though, is because one of the people one of the art historians who talks the most about simulation and simulacrum is my favorite Walt Disney Imagineer. Those are the guys who design the parks, Joe Rohde. And I texted you this the other day because Joe Rohde, raised Catholic. I think he still is. I've heard from, I'm friends with a priest who's friends with a makeup artist in Hollywood who is friends with Joe Rohde and like goes camping with him on the regular.
Oh yeah,
and she says he's still a pretty.
That sounds like a Hollywood connection.
Pretty devout Catholic.
Yeah.
Right. She said he's pretty devout Catholic still. But anyway, he talks a lot about art history, Catholic art history specifically, how pilgrimage sites and living nativities and all those sorts of things end up fueling theme park design, which then, he is a theme park designer. He basically personally designed Walt Disney's Animal Kingdom. But he recently posted or reposted, I guess, a parody of Noel, the song Noel, that is actually an artistic history of the nativity scene.
So legit.
And maybe we'll read it out. I'll tell you what. I'll read just the first paragraph here. Let me try to find it because he talks about this sarcophagus thing that's right at the beginning, and I actually think it'd be interesting. He like sort of chapter by chapter goes through this thing, and I think this would be an interesting way to sort of close each chapter of our exploration of this stuff. I'm pulling it up. I already had it pulled up, but then Instagram deleted it. The first Noel appears to be on a sarcophagus from the 4th century. Shortly after, we can see iconographies fixed for the next 15 centuries, just how they're mixed. Noel, 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 Noel. It's a motif that has held up quite well. The ox and the ass, which a lamb can replace, are symbolic of mankind's receptions of grace. When the stable is shown in a ruined stone hall, it's a symbol of triumph for Romans and all. Noel, 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 Noel. So read the images we know so well.
That's awesome. That's so legit. I did not actually read that far into it. So that's hilarious. That's a good history of it. Yeah.
He goes through everything we're going to go through. And I like that we're connecting. I mean, I know I'm reading the parts of it or singing the parts of his song that pertain to the stuff we've already covered with the sarcophagus and the ox and the ass and everything. But I think by getting into like the lived experiential, immersive version of the nativity that St. Francis designs and then starts to propagate, like we are coming into an art form,
right,
that people are familiar with. And so
right.
I think it's cool just for me personally, and maybe for the listener, to connect that to an actual Disney Imagineer who's doing the modern version of that and seeing the connections of how that particular art form has grown and traces its ancestral roots back to this event.
Right. Cool. Oh no, for sure. I think that's great. And I want to pass it to you with sort of post-medieval stuff here in just a second. But I just want to say, but just before, like one last word about St. Francis and the Greccio Crèche. Of course, like where does Crèche comes from? It comes from Greccio. Right? You turn it into French and it becomes Crèche basically. But the kitsch. Like the kitsch, and maybe even the sense of like excess or whatever is also not absent in the scene, and I think that's something that's important. Lest again like our notion of Christmas become too sanitized, or our notion of St. Francis become too sanitized. Both are always more than you can handle, and both should always be more than you can handle. So we talked, we talk a lot about how Christmas should be more than you can handle. But here's this incredible example about St. Francis. This is literally the passage where we learned that St. Francis was a deacon. There is no earlier indication anywhere in history that he was a deacon, except in this passage we're told that he was a deacon and he was singing the gospel for this Christmas midnight mass, which is all fascinating, and he preaches, and he's just so into it. Like you got to realize, like Francis is always more extra than you are, and he's like always more of everything than you are, and so like. he sometimes would like literally carry around a lamb, just literally carry around a lamb, because lambs reminded him of Jesus, and
Yeah.
he just couldn't get enough. He just could not get enough, you know. So here's what he says. This is what Thomas Solano says about Francis. This scene with him like singing the gospel and then preaching at this first midnight mass with the first Crèche at Greccio. He says, burning with excessive love, he often calls Christ, quote, the babe from Bethlehem, whenever he means to call him Jesus. And this I love. I can't even handle it. I love it so much. Saying the word Bethlehem in the manner of a bleeding sheep. He fills his whole mouth with sound, but even more with sweet affection. St. Francis is preaching this, I'm sure, like one of the world's great sermons on the Nativity at midnight mass, surrounded by like animals and hay and stuff, and he is literally, every time he says where Jesus was born, he's going, Bethlehem.
I love that. That's so great because, like, I will tell a story later on in this podcast, but I for many years had to narrate the children's nativity pageant at my parish, and in Steubenville, Ohio, you know, where, you know, sort of prudishness and you know, old church ladies are like originally designed, like that's the factory, and I was always pushing like, we should have live animals at this thing, and we should like do this and we should do that. And everyone was always like, that would be tacky, that would be sacrilegious. And I just imagined those people walking into a church where like a priest surrounded by livestock was saying a mass and preaching while doing an impression of a sheep, and just how offended those people would be. And then being able to turn around and be like, that's St. Francis, the inventor of the nativity, actually. So
about that though, but could you imagine he's preaching and he keeps saying the babe from Bethlehem.
This dude mofo was crazy.
He's always more
in the coolest way.
One last point. It says he seems to lick his lips whenever he uses the expressions Jesus or babe from Bethlehem, tasting the word on his happy palate and savoring the sweetness of the word. So like, he literally finds like physical sweetness in saying the word Jesus or babe from Bethlehem, to the extent that he like licks his lips to get all that sweetness. Just deal with this. Just deal with how weird this is.
You know that thing where like when someone yawns and then you feel like you have to yawn because they yawned? I'm doing that right now. Like you said, lick your lips, and I'm like, my God, my lips are actually really chapped.
Yeah.
Bethlehem. But I do think, you know, I'm making this joke about like old church ladies clutching their pearls when they see an original nativity as depicted by St. Francis. But I think there's something poignant here that connects to the nativity itself, which is, I mean, I have this theory that and this is not my own. I mean, this is Chesterton, this is Lewis for sure. But there's sort of this sense that like the modern Christian would probably be horrified and scandalized by the intensity and the demeanor of most saints. And that's even truer of the actual nativity. Like the actual nativity is intentionally jarring and gross because it's this idea of, well, I'll open this way. So I'm seeing my clients that I see in my psychotherapeutic practice for the last time this week before we're off for Christmas. Because even if I wanted to work up till Christmas, none of those people want to have an appointment a day before Christmas. So we were wrapping up for like a 2-week break this week, and I often try to give, because it's a Catholic spiritual practice, I often try to give, when applicable, when sincerely and naturally and organically applicable, some kind of spiritual takeaway that gels with the psychological takeaway for them to meditate upon. And one of the things that I was sort of struck by in the moment was a very Holy Spirit thing. But I was talking to a few different couples who fight a lot, you know, have a lot of domestic disputes, not physical or anything, but just arguments, because they're really scared of like empathy and vulnerability. Which is, you know, something common that I'm sure you see in confessions with couples, and I see all the time as a therapist. And I was saying to them, like, look, you know, you're all stressed out because you're preparing for Christmas and you're sort of killing each other over it. I said, but the true meaning of Christmas is the most powerful being, putting aside those things that make him powerful to become the most vulnerable and fragile you can imagine someone being in the grossest possible scenario, explicitly for the sake of relationship with you.
Yeah.
And I really need you guys over the course of the next 2 weeks when we're not speaking to each other to let that be a point of meditation within yourselves and between you and your marriage. Because the true meaning of Christmas isn't the gifts, obviously, but it also isn't just like, oh, keep Christ in Christmas, let's go to church together. The true meaning of Christmas is being able to consciously say, this is scary for me to do, but I'm going to make myself really vulnerable to you. And to a degree that's actually like, that feels gross and like gives me some spiritual acid reflux almost, where I'm like, ew, I don't want to do this. You know, a baby in a stable surrounded by, I'll just say it, like animal shit, while a violent act is, you know, at least biblically going on outside with the murder of the innocents and stuff, is one of the crassest things when we're desensitized to it because of Christmas cards. But one of the crassest things that when you actually acknowledge it, a person could possibly imagine. And then you add on to that baby is the creator of the universe. And it's nothing short of blasphemous, except that it's also the most sacred thing in the world. And I think we have to keep that in mind on a psychological level, the way I'm saying with my clients, on a spiritual level, the way we're talking about, on an artistic level, the way we're talking about, on an anthropological level, on all the levels, as Jack Sparrow would say, you know, spiritually, physically, ecumenically. We have to keep all of this in mind, that this is a radical, gross, sacrilegious kind of an event.
Sacrilegious. Well, that's apparently what Francis thought it was, because of the licking of the lips.
Smacking his lips. Exactly. Sacrilegious. And I think we have to remember that as I take the baton from you and look at some of these post-medieval and Renaissance depictions, because if St. Francis is obsessed with the physicality of the incarnation, if he's obsessed with the tactility and the sacred grossness, as I would say, of the birth of Christ, then the artists that follow him take that and like turn up the volume. Because what you see, you know, you mentioned this sort of already, but you know, where Jesus is originally in these burial cloths and then maybe in sort of the suburban baby blanket or a onesie or whatever it is, pretty soon, like, Jesus is aggressively naked.
Yeah.
And my favorite depictions of the Nativity are, there's this motif where the wise men, their central function in a lot of artistic depictions, because the wise men are sort of the stand-in for Gentiles and pagans, right? You know, like in the Nativity scene, like these are Gentiles, these are pagans. The shepherds are sort of stand-ins for Jewish people. So it's the coming together of the two sides of the kingdom of God. And of course, the Magi represent other things like wealth versus the shepherd's poverty and stuff. But within this lens, right, you know, there is sort of the, you know, here are the wise men representing paganism and earthliness and all this stuff. And this motif that I love so much is that repeatedly the wise men are pointing directly to Christ's penis.
Oh yeah, sure.
In tons and tons of images, because they're saying, look, like this, yes, it's God, but like, do not think that this is just like God wearing a person costume or a spirit or an apparition. Like, this is a boy with boy parts and a human with human parts, and also it's God. And so, you know, the shepherds and Mary and these people are sort of, you know, praising the heavens, and they're looking upwards that way, or maybe even at Jesus's face, depending on the depiction. But the wise men are like leaning in weirdly close, like inappropriately close, and just like, check out this baby's penis. How cool and sacred is that? And I just think that's awesome.
Right. Yeah.
I just think that's the coolest thing ever. And you start to see that propagated everywhere. A lot of those scenes. And then the other thing you see is, as I mentioned, you know, the cast of characters just keeps growing. And that becomes really true because the Crèche, or as it's also sometimes called the Principio, is this thing where, you know, these figures start being represented physically as statuaries, as giant statues, as little tiny statues. Sometimes they're still acted out physically. I mean, there is a tradition where in France, where at Christmas Eve midnight mass, like a local dude will bring up a lamb at the beginning of mass to be blessed. This happens at this time precisely because of St. Francis's thing. So sometimes there are actually actors like playing the parts or animals, but like the statue part becomes more and more popular, particularly because of, and this is a privilege I had, I mentioned the nativity I grew up with in my home, but the nativity I grew up with publicly was actually one of the original Precipios. In Pittsburgh, they have at the Art Museum, the Carnegie Museum of Art, there was this family of porcelain makers in Naples, Italy in the late 1400s who started designing like the early nativity scenes. And like the oldest one that's still intact is owned by the Pittsburgh Museum of Art. And it's huge. And it's a tradition. They keep it under lock and key most of the year. And then every Christmas they set up like 6 Christmas trees in the gallery and set up the whole Precipio. And it's literally,
Whoa.
I mean, it's a D&D campaign. I mean, it's literally they built
how many dragons
giant, like 100 dragons. No,
Yes.
they have, all these like miniature train set style caverns and hills and glens and, hey nani nanis. And then in the center, almost hidden to make this like artistic point about how subtle and humble this is, almost hidden sort of the back is Mary and Jesus and Joseph with their cow and their donkey. But then they're like literally 500 figures.
Oh my gosh.
Like
and
all around.
This is from the 1400s.
Late 1400s, early 1500s.
Okay. Oh my
is when this
gosh,
happened.
though.
Yeah.
But that's insane.
Yeah. I forget when Naples is occupied by France. So this is when that's happening.
Okay.
So I think that's like early 1500s. But Naples. What do you call someone from Naples? Nepalese?
Neapolitan.
I don't know. Neapolitan.
Like
you.
the ice cream.
Not the ice cream. Yeah. So this family of Neapolitan ice cream, strawberry, vanilla, and chocolate, they start building
like the
these
3 wise
porcelain
men.
Nativities. Like the 3, like all comes full
There it
circle.
is. There it is. The most Christmas. Ladies and gentlemen, what's the most Christmas themed ice cream? Neapolitan ice cream.
Oh my God. I kind of want to like make a dessert that looks like crowns, but it's Neapolitan. Okay. I'm going to say that for later. Anyway, so they make like 500 figures. These Precipios or these Crèches.
Oh my gosh.
Precipios and Italian Crèches in France. And the figures are basically everybody in your village.
Yeah.
That's the point of it. And I think that's amazing that like, sometimes it's because the artist just did it. Sometimes it's because it's commissioned by the church. Sometimes it's because you pay for it. It depends on what it is. But like literally the butcher from your town is bringing a ham to the baby Jesus. Like the priest from your town is bringing the lamb to the baby Jesus. The town drunk from your town is sitting there drinking by the baby Jesus. And there's an incarnational point being made here that like Christ is coming into your world.
Yeah.
Your world. And
Right.
there's also an artistic
Right.
point being made here where like I'm important, I'm a part of this narrative. This is not a past event. This is an active event that I am a part of now. And you see some really weird stuff come out of this. I'm talking too much about Disney today, but there's actually in Epcot, which is a celebration of like the world, and they have all these kind of pavilions of different countries. They do this thing every Christmas called the Holiday Storytellers, where at each pavilion, you can meet the Santa Claus from that place.
Oh, sure.
And he tells a story about a Christmas custom from there. And my favorite one is in the France pavilion, Père Noël comes out, kind of Dumbledore Santa, basically, crazy long beard and the red robes and everything, and actually tells the story of the history of the Crèche. And he talks about St. Francis.
Yeah.
And he talks about, and he says, the Crèche is very French, even though it was invented by an Italian, no?
No,
St. Francis.
no, St. Francis. But But when he talks about Bethlehem, does he say Bethlehem?
He does not say Bethlehem, but he does.
What a loser.
And then the whole sort of narrative is that this little girl, Babette, has written him a letter asking for a Crèche figure made to look like her.
Oh, nice.
And that's the sort of, and so by the end he like pulls out of his magical sack in this little performance that he does, which is just like sort of buskery, like in the middle of the street. Like it's not on a stage or anything. It's just he comes out in the middle of the street, and if you happen to be there, you can gather around and hear him talk to you. And he kind of pulls out this little figure of Babette, and he's like, "Look, here's a carved wooden figure of Babette." And he talks about like the priest being carved in this thing, and the baker being carved in this thing, and everything else. And so this I'm going all over the place with this, but this Precipio that I grew up with in Pittsburgh is one of the largest and oldest versions of this, with literally like 500 figures of everybody you can imagine in your town. And I think about this often. Like if we still did this, which I wish we did. Like I wish I could walk into a church now and see little stable, and then like my friends, like all of us, like in our best outfit, whatever, in your khakis or in your suit or whatever it is, carved as like a little Barbie doll, going up to see Jesus with whatever thing you do. So like if I'm an artist, I have my little art palette, and I'm bringing this up to Jesus. And this is something like my wife and I have even talked about, like as we, have started our family together. Like one of the ways that we, one of the meditations that I've sort of brought to us to think about is like, if I were to ever design our own Precipio, like for our family, where like each of the family members were bringing stuff up, like what would we be bringing up?
Oh, cool.
Like, what would the gift that we would be bringing up? Like, what
I would be
physical object would say that
under
much about
200 pounds of crushing guilt. Baby Jesus, I have this for you. It's incredible guilt.
Oh my God. Just a little peek into Father Gabriel's psyche here. Or
possibly recrimination of others, that's
right. One of those
giant
things.
sack you have over your back,
Right, exactly. But I love that. I love that.
I do honestly love that. That's super legit.
I wish we could go into a church, especially like with the capacity we have to like photograph people. I'm giving away an idea I've had for a long time, but with the ability we have to photograph people and 3D print them now. Like my wife and I, our wedding cake toppers was like, they photographed us from like 800 different angles in a tiny thing, and then they did a little 3D print of us. And I think like a Precipio done that way, where like people can donate a small amount of money to the parish and then get a 3D printed version of them, and then everybody can like go, I think is the coolest combination of modern and ancient.
That would be pretty legit. That'd be pretty legit. My the pastor at the parish where we met in Cincinnati, he started to there was a real spirit of St. Francis going on here with the way that he started to let his Crèche scene just go like totally insane. Like it had this is inside the church. He would take over a side chapel every year, and just like could convert the whole side chapel into a Crèche situation. And it had like an actual water feature, like a moving water feature.
I remember that.
And
that
all
was
this
pretty
stuff.
awesome.
And it was so boss. And then one of my friends, as a joke, put in one of his boys' toy dinosaur, like a dinosaur in it. Cause he was trying to hide it from this boy, or maybe he just like I forget, maybe he actually just wanted like the boy to like whatever make a gift to Jesus. I forget which one it was. Anyway, so and then of course eventually the pastor found this and thought it was just absolutely screamingly hilarious. So then started to add like a ton of other things, so like random dogs, just like and all kinds of things that he could find. He got these motion sensitive birds that every time he walked past them start singing, and then intentionally set one of them up so that like it was pointing towards where people went to receive the precious blood. So whenever anybody went to receive the precious blood in the Christmas season, you'd hear this bird going chirp 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 chirp.
Oh my gosh.
Chirp, chirp. Yeah, most people didn't notice, but I noticed.
Oh boy, did I notice.
I loved it so much. Eventually a bunch of moralistic people started to fix the problem and just started stealing things out of it that they didn't think belonged. It was really offensive.
Which then leads us to something you mentioned in I forget which podcast, but where we're physically like zip tying Jesus into the manger, so none of the pearl clutchers
Jesus into the manger.
Him.
Exactly. That's why. What is Father bringing to baby Jesus? 300 pounds of recrimination of all you people.
Well, the pearl clutchers stealing the dinosaur out of the nativity are gonna be really horrified when I explain the reason for the intro that I made,
Oh my gosh, yeah.
which is that okay? So we have our Crèche in France, we have our Principio in Italy. When this hits Spain, dude, they go freaking crazy. Like Spain in general has this weird obsession with poop in regards to Christmas.
Okay.
Like if you're familiar with the Christmas turd from South Park, God, I mentioned Family Guy and South Park in the same episode. I sound so sophomoric, but if you're familiar with the Christmas turd in South Park,
Of course.
like you would be surprised to perhaps note that is not that far from genuinely Spanish Renaissance Christmas traditions, where their equivalent of Santa, their holiday gift bringer, is a magical log with a face.
Which is all pretty reasonable.
And you feed it food all throughout Advent, just stuffing shit down its throat all Advent. And then on Christmas Eve, all the kids get together and beat it with a stick and say, Mr. Log, poop me a present, just not sardines, is the rough translation.
Well, I mean, nobody wants sardines. Not true, though.
Yeah.
I actually love sardines. They're insane.
You love sardines,
They're
but
delicious,
for a Spanish child with a magical log,
you apparently don't want sardines.
sardines are the equivalent of coal. And so then they're ushered into another room, and when they come out, their beating, the beating that they have enacted upon this poor overstuffed log has caused him to diarrhea out Christmas presents.
Yeah, I think that most of us have had that experience. Yeah, I think
this is. I'm not joking.
Yeah.
I'm not exaggerating. I'm not emphasizing like the crassness of this, like to be silly or goofy. This is the legitimate cockatiel, Uncle Pooper.
Uncle Pooper.
And this is a Spanish tradition. But this is also in the Nativity because they really want to emphasize like what I was saying before about like the crassness of the incarnation and like the sacred grossness of things. And so there is a character that is in every Spanish statuary nativity scene where he's like basically a shepherd, maybe a hobo. He's definitely like a grizzled dude. And he is straight up dropping trow, and his bare butt is taking a crap on the grass outside the stable. This is an actual figure.
Yeah.
This is not a rare thing.
Yeah, with
This
like
is not
actual
a
poo
secular
ejection.
thing.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Like,
I
there's
have
a
seen this.
little
Yeah,
brown turd
with like
coming out.
actual poo ejection. Yeah. I mean,
And I think a lot of
an
Catholic
action
people,
figure, but yeah.
if they were to, I think a lot of Catholic people, Christian people, if they saw this out of context, would go, "Oh, this is like some secular person like putting something gross in the nativity." No, it is not, my friend. It is literally like a very devout spiritual symbol that Spanish Catholics were like, yes, we have a cow, we have a camel, we have a black, white, and an Asian color-coded magi.
Because those are the only people in the world.
Right, those are the only people in the world, no other races. But you know what we really need is like a guy taking a nervous poop outside of where Jesus is being born.
Yeah. Just like I'm so excited. I just really got to chuck a deuce right now. Yeah. Which is
So
I
you've
think
seen this?
Yeah. I have. Yes. Yeah.
Because I actually saw some of these in Spain, like for sale, because
Ooh.
it's so famous now that they will like sell these individual figures. So when I went to Spain on pilgrimage,
Did you buy
I
one?
saw some of these. I did not buy one. I bought a Templar sword from Toledo, which is
Okay.
like the sword making capital of Europe.
Yeah.
So I thought that was cooler, and also I'm a nerd. But if I went now, I would buy a pooping figure
Yeah. Fact.
because that's actually cooler.
It is. Yeah. It's true. But if you were in high school, like no high school boy who's offered the chance to buy a sword can resist the chance to buy a sword. So just how it is.
No.
Yeah.
And that is a devil's bargain, like to have to choose as a high school boy, having to choose between a pooping action figure or a sword.
An actual legit sword, but
Right,
you
I
know,
made the sword
swords. Yeah, swords are that's the wise choice.
Yeah. Or wait, I actually have the sword. Let me grab it.
Yep, that is a sword. The thing about that is it's 100% a sword. That's really
so
it.
YouTube viewers, this is my sword.
Yes.
This is a actual like Templar sword and has a little made in Toledo.
Toledo.
Yeah. When I went to, so I'll just set that on the floor next to my
which is
my
what you
rock star
which is,
leather Santa cloak.
which is what you do with swords. All this seems like I'm really dropping the ball on show and tell today. I got nothing. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's okay. This is supposed to be an auditory medium, but I'm breaking that rule. But yeah. So you see this in Spain, France, everywhere in Europe. These like figures getting crazier and crazier and more personal and weirder. And I do love this. I love that there is this emphasis on the crassness. I love that there is this emphasis on the personal, that I myself am in the nativity, that I'm not necessarily looking my best. Like maybe I'm taking a crap there because Jesus is there to save me, not as I'd like to be in my Sunday best, but as I am, like taking a nervous poop outside the stable. Like this is super gross and intentionally so, but it's so profoundly beautiful.
Right.
I really vibe off of this stuff.
Yeah. No, that is really fantastic. And that you're right. I mean, the emphasis here is on the well, it's like this whole Francis thing that you just can't get away from how real it is, right? And that like he just like what's the motivation that Francis says? He just wants to see it. He wants to be there. He wants to just like everything he wants his whole person to be a part of this. Like not leaving anything behind, not leaving anything behind. And that's fine. That's actually what the incarnation means. And so like the one thing that he does end up leaving behind is like what some people might consider good taste. But like it's but like okay, that he didn't need good taste. He needed like the actual devotion that he has, and like that's ends up being this much richer reality than like the sort of like social norms of like taste.
Yeah, good taste is so overrated, especially when it comes to Christmas. And if there's no other lesson that you've drawn from these last 3 episodes on Christmas kitsch, on Christmas music and this, I hope it's that people take that message. This would be a good place to wrap up, but there's like a lot of other things that don't necessarily fall within the linear timeline of nativities that I really want to be able to talk about. There's some of my favorite nativities that we haven't discussed yet, including like more modern nativities. And I know that there are some that you're kind of obsessed with. I've been talking more than a hot minute about shepherds taking a crap though. So why don't you, what are some of the more modern nativities that you either love or think are hilarious for some reason, or just, I mean, I know we already talked about, the 3 wise men. But what are some other sort of modern nativity trappings that we should note in our deep dive here?
Well, I think like painting wise, one of my very favorite modern ones is it's a nativity / adoration of the Magi by Rubens, Peter Paul Rubens, which is just insane because he's just showing off. He's like, look, I know how to paint muscles, and like, look, I can paint people, and like this canvas is so awesome, and it's just crammed with like as many figures of as many kinds as you can possibly get into this thing. So you have like the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, you got this midget, got a couple of midgets running around, you got camels, you got like people of different races, you got all this. It's just this whole huge, ridiculously over the top explosion. And I love the fact that he's not hiding the fact that like a significant portion of this is like braggadocio about like how amazing his artistic technique is, which is totally fine because it is that amazing. But then also like this is the church and this is the incarnation, and like you just can freaking deal with that, like it is. I mean, I think it's important that that's not the only way that these things are depicted. That there are like so as you said, that you do sometimes get this kind of arms race where it's like how many figures, how much poop, how many things can you put into this nativity set, this Crèche or Principio or whatever. But there is and one thing I love about this Rubens painting is that it does that. It's like it's everybody and the kitchen sink, and the kitchen sink had a couple of babies, and then like I don't know, a camel came from somewhere and I'm not really sure, which is really awesome because that gives us this universality, this kind of uncontrolled, wild aspect of it. But it is also worth noting that then you will have like the exact opposite inspiration, which is just a different way of looking at the way in which we exist in the church. And that's like radically stripped down, where it's like
Sure.
maybe it's just Mary and Joseph and Jesus, or maybe it's Mary and Joseph and Jesus and like shepherds, or or magi, or like something else, which again I think is actually helpful, because like even theologically think, oh, okay, I mean, like, yes, we're part of this huge messy crowd of like everybody that's the church, but also like I have to be here individually, and like I can't just be riding on everybody else's coattails. Like I have to be, as you were saying, radically vulnerable and comfortable enough, free enough, desirous enough, actually in love enough to want to be here myself.
Right. And I think that that's an important part of the Nativity too, which is, I want to read this line actually, because this is a perfect kind of setup to what I want to say here. Let me find it. Okay, so the next line in Joe Rohde's Noel parody, he says, "Noel, Noel, Noel, Noel. Stories don't change, but we change what we tell." And I think that sums this up perfectly, because this isn't so much like, oh, first the nativity is depicted this way, and then like something else is added to it later on. Like, as you said, this is not a linear line. That's redundant, but you know what I mean? This is all one universal truth. But like the Buddhist proverb of the different old men, blind men touching the elephant, and one person saying, oh, this trunk is actually a snake, or this leg is actually a tree, right? These are different cultures coming in contact with the moment of the incarnation and bringing their own need to it, and finding that sincerely and genuinely there. Like, they're not projecting something false onto it. They are finding sincerely the meaning that they need. So, the early Christians are finding this beautiful juxtaposition of life and death in this bound up, half mummified skeleton Voldemort baby surrounded by farm animals, right? But then, you're seeing later, this is something we haven't really mentioned specifically, but like, as the church, especially under Francis, starts like re-examining its relationship to poverty and recognizing like, hey, like Christ does in fact have a preferential love for the poor. We're seeing this beautiful juxtaposition of the Magi now depicted as the three kings, the rich, the wealthy, the educated, juxtaposed against the poor, homeless, reject, social outcast shepherds covered in animal dung. And like both of these people are welcomed, and Aquinas talks about this in the Summa, on his lecture on modesty, how we see the juxtaposition of the kings in their finery and the shepherds in their slovenliness, and both are incredibly sacred when brought to Christ. And then we're seeing now what I think is really cool, and this is why I'm bringing this up. You mentioned the alternative, and neither of these are bad or good. They're just different kind of schools of artistic thought with the Nativity. But you mentioned the kind of sacred, intimate moment of the Holy Family. And I think that that's an important thing too, where we're seeing, like as our present culture needs to be focusing more on the central unit of the family, and like the importance of the family in a culture where the family has been sort of ripped apart by various economic systems or different, cultural traumas. The sacred moment of the family just sharing this intimacy together in the dark, mom and dad and baby. That's the part of the Nativity we need to focus on now. Or even as we in our culture look anew at Christianity's relationship to other religions, right? That's a much more modern conversation, faith conversation, than maybe some of the ones they were having in the Middle Ages or the Renaissance. We're starting to focus less on the Magi depicted as kings because of their wealth, and more on their more authentic depiction as literal magi, that is to say, magicians, wizards of the Zoroastrian fire worshipping faith tradition, where these are, pagan fire worshipping magician priests who are expecting to find like the fulfillment of their religion, and they're venturing off and instead discovering, our God. And so, we're focusing more on that and their wizardness. And now there are 3 wizards coming to this very intimate family celebration. And I think that's beautiful too, in the same way that like a shepherd pooping is a representation of my spirituality. If I'm coming in like the 1600s, this intimate moment of the family surrounded by wizards is a very authentic look at what my spiritual needs are right now.
That is legitimately the most accurate single sentence summary of your spiritual life I've ever heard, Jacob.
Wait, okay, elaborate on that. Why?
It's just
a quiet, intimate moment surrounded by wizards.
Yes, a quiet moment. Just a mother, a father, a child, wizards.
I kind of hate that you're so right, and I didn't even think of that. But
when you say, sometimes when you see preachers can get caught up in this too. Sometimes when we say like, this is just the most accurate description of my spiritual life right now. Sometimes we're meaning this in the kind of like collective me, collective we, kind of like this is let's think about our culture. Sometimes we accidentally mean like, yeah, basically like you look inside my heart and you're going to see like a father and a mother and a child and some mother flipping wizards.
I appreciate you censoring yourself for the 1 or 2 children with terrible parents who might still be listening. But
yes, exactly. What do you mean? What do you mean censoring? I just said a curse.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Isn't that the word, the curse that the kids say these days?
Yeah, mother flipping. That's the most popular.
I think so. Yeah,
that's the most
I've definitely
popular
heard that.
parlance of the day.
Yeah.
You raise an interesting point, though. I mean, I'm sort of raising it as well, but that these different approaches, these different windows into the nativity are representative of our own spiritual needs at that time. I mean, here's an interesting question, and I know it's a deviation, but like if you were to design a nativity based on where you're at spiritually right now, what would that look like?
Yeah. I don't know, man. I don't know. I mean, like, yeah, that's a really interesting idea. I don't know if like, well, I don't know. There could be various cool things that could come, and like, I don't know, like what would be perfectly expressing like where I am spiritually right now. I think I would need a long time to think about that. So I maybe can't answer that right now, just because I think I would need to get even a remotely honest answer. I would just need a lot more time to reflect on it. But there are like very beautiful things that you could do to like kind of reimagine the power of a crèche in a way. I don't know, like I'm just thinking of like like, so Catherine of Siena, who's one of my very favorites, she's always talking about like living in Christ's heart and like crawling to like the side wound of Christ and like dwelling inside of Christ, and that like that's like her refuge, is like that the cave in which she lives is like the side wound of Christ, like
crawling up and scrunching and cuddling into this gaping wound in the side of Jesus.
Yeah, which is exactly basically how she puts it. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Like, do you see, do you present the nativity as like as taking place inside the side wound? I don't know. I mean, like
my God, that'd be so cool.
That's a
if
kind
you
of
actually had like a giant crucifix corpus and then like a gash in his side, and in that is the little nativity.
Something like that. I don't know. I mean, it's just like imagining, would it really work? Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't, but just like...
Or what if you had like a crucifix that was the whole sort of life of Christ built around his body? Like,
now people will do that. They will do that like, stuff. Yeah.
I've never seen that before.
Yeah. So I mean, not like his body, the corpus physically consisting of it, but like around, I mean, in the background. Yeah.
Oh no, absolutely. I mean his body, like literally, like the wound is the cave of the nativity, and his shoulders are like, or his, maybe his one shoulder is where the crosses are, like on Golgotha.
Oh, that would be legit. Yeah.
Up. Like, and so you actually like associate the different body parts to like different moments in the gospel.
Which is, I mean, now that you could do a deep dive into medieval devotion to Christ, because there is a lot of that. But like that would be really boss. And even like, what I was thinking is, So this Dominican saint whom I really adore,
The blind one who eats pillows for breakfast.
Exactly. No,
Yeah.
only she is blind though. Actually, Saint Margaret of Castello. So she's
Oh yeah,
blind.
you've
and-
told me about her. Yeah.
Yeah, she's blind and she's crippled. Like she's born blind and she's born like hunchbacked, kind of like deformed in some kind of a way. And
The
like,
Ricky Berwick of
crippled.
Catholicism.
I don't know who that is, but I'm gonna say yes.
Ricky Berwick is the really crippled YouTuber that I keep sending
Okay,
you
you have
videos
said it.
of.
Yes, then him. Yes, yes, exactly. And yeah, so she has all this and she's like really amazing. When she dies, because like they don't care in the, like, if you haven't gotten a theme yet, like in the Middle Ages don't care. Okay, the Middle Ages is too cool for you. And you are too much of a weirdo to handle the Middle Ages, because like when she dies, there I have translated this Vita, this life of her, the first life of hers that was written, that we have surviving, which will be published at some point. But it describes how they are doing the, not exactly an autopsy because they know what she died of, but they're doing like a, well, anyway, they need to get her organs out because they're gonna like preserve her, you know. So they
Sure,
gotta
as
get
one
her
does.
organs out.
See the relics episode.
Well, the best place to do that, of course, is naturally in a church. So they're doing that. So they're taking her organs out in a church. And it describes pretty graphically how somebody basically chops out her heart, you know, among all the other things, and then from basically from like the aorta, falls, I think 3 gemstones or 4. Anyway,
What?
yes. And one of them, and they have images on them. Everything about this is amazing. They have images on them, and one of them is the Nativity, because she
Oh shit.
because she constantly meditated on the Nativity and she loved the Nativity, and she like, it was at the heart of her spiritual life was the Nativity. And like there's this miraculous thing that when her heart is literally torn out of her body, so that the rest of her body can be preserved, out falls gemstones, like devotion rendered as physical precious objects, on which there are images of this reality, of, you realize these like graced realities that in fact she literally held in her heart. And this
That
one
is
has
amazing.
one of them is an image of the Nativity. And I just think that kind of like meta thing in like saints' lives, that's really doing it for me, you know.
That's really cool. That
Yeah.
would be an amazing depiction.
Yeah.
To see. Is that on display somewhere?
The Vita describes the way that they are preserved in the sacristy of the Dominican Church, in Castello. I've never been there, and I don't know if they still exist.
Okay.
So
That's really cool, though.
you know, tokens associated with that story. I don't know. I don't know if they still exist or not.
That's really cool. We're
This is
talking
the
about
13th
these
century,
like,
so yeah.
right. We're talking about these very sacred and mystical nativities that we would love to have seen past tense, or would love to see designed future tense in the case of my like super elaborate corpus idea. But I want to talk about some of the other like weirder nativities, like the fun ones that we've seen as well. You previewed for me, and this I'm saying literally everything I know, that you wanted, and I can't introduce it better than this, you wanted to talk about a fat nativity at some point in this episode.
Yeah. So like I have given, this is at the Art Institute of Chicago, ladies and gentlemen, if you live in Chicago, or if you like come to Chicago to stalk me, then like,
Yeah, do we have groupies listening?
I don't
If we have
know. I
groupies,
hope
you guys
so.
should come stalk us in Florida
Yeah.
or Chicago, respectively.
yeah, Chicago, and
That's
that's
the
two.
worst place I can imagine.
Yeah, there's a lot of killing there, but everyone's a Republican. It's very confusing. It's very confusing. It's at the Art Institute, and I've led a couple of tours to the Art Institute, and I insist on talking about this image because it's so out of control. It's from like 1507, 1510-ish. It's from this, we don't know who the painter is, but he's called the Master of Pulkow. So he's like Bavarian, Austrian from the early 16th century. He's a really talented painter. And it's all the things about the Nativity that you know and love. So there's like but it's the stable kind, so there's ox and ass, and they are all up on the scene. In fact, they are way present. And then you've got this like baby Jesus who's like lying on a sheaf of wheat. And he's also lying on a corporal, which is the thing that you spread out on top of the priest spread outs on top of the altar, that he puts the Eucharist on, the
Sure.
paten chalice that has the Eucharist on it. So he's lying on a corporal, which is being held by angels and all this kind of stuff. Everything is about it's amazing. And you've got Mary in the background. You've got Joseph. It's incorporating some stuff from an early apocryphal version of the Nativity. So he's got Joseph is leading a midwife to Mary and all this stuff. But P.S. like in the story, Mary's already given birth, and there's Jesus and all. So it's got everything that you know and love about every like standard nativity scene, except like everyone weighs between 300 and 500 pounds.
And why is that?
Well, I have theories. I mean, at first you just want to laugh and be like, this is Mary as a very, very hearty German Hausfrau,
The line that's coming to mind is the Silence of the Lambs, where the serial killer Buffalo Bill is like talking to the cop. It's like, is she a great big fat person?
Oh dear, a great big fat person.
Is she a great big fat person?
It's incredible. Like Mary looks like a house. She's gigantic, and Joseph he's smaller in the background. He is so fat that his belly is hanging over his belt.
Yeah, they look a little like they were stung by bees.
It's incredible. I love them so much. I love everything about them. I have various theories for why they are as big as houses. I actually do think it has to do with by the way, baby Jesus is fat. The angels are fat as all get out. These are fat ass angels. Like their wings are not doing it. They are fat angels, and
I'm
because
a beautiful butterfly.
yeah, because they do not fly with the wings, they fly with the grace. Which is how they do it. But I think it's actually trying to represent, among other things, superabundance. Abundance, that there's just so much there that like normal human proportions are not going to hold how much there is, that like he does like kind of the think actually what like Michelangelo is doing, that you're going to use the physical characteristics of the body to manifest visibly the indwelling of God or the indwelling of grace, if it's talking about Mary and Joseph and stuff. Only instead of saying I'm gonna render this as like abs and like ripped muscles, you say like massive. It's just gonna be, everything's just gonna be massive, just huge, just spilling out, fat everywhere, gigantic. Joseph's so full of grace that his belly is hanging over his belt and you can't even see it anymore. Mary as big as a house. Like angels who can't even fly with their little chubby baby wings because like they are just like all spilling out with everything everywhere. And in the middle of all of this like super abundance, which is just like crazy everything everywhere, is like fat and happy baby Jesus who's just like lying on a corporal. So like, what are they all filled with? Guess what? It's the Eucharist. Like, it's the life of grace. It's them living with Jesus Christ inside of them, and like they like normal human proportions literally can't even hold them.
Wow, I love that as a visual. I really do. Like, that superabundance thing is super beautiful. I mean, again, it's one of those things that's right up my alley, where it's like the sacred crassness. But God, that's really, really cool. This is at the Art Museum in Chicago.
The Art Institute of Chicago. It is the hottest thing since sliced bread, which is not necessarily hot, but it's so great, and like I love everything about it, because like Mary doesn't even necessarily look pretty per se, like not in the kind of standard sense. and like all in the foreground you see all of these irises, and you're like, what are all these irises doing? Now irises are like um possibly my favorite flower, so I'm happy they're there just for their own sake. But you think like, what are
Oh,
all these irises doing? Well, iris in German is a Schwertlilie. So it's a sword lily because a sword will pierce her heart.
oh,
But it's a
dang.
lily because of the purity and perfection, right? So,
Oh, that's pretty cool.
so it's like everything is there. Like, it's just again like everything is spilling out, and I just like I love that so much. I love that so much. But the times when I've done art, like I've done tours of this and like brought groups to it, I try to save it for last because it's such like a showstopper. And like, you know, you've seen all these like beautiful paintings, these like Renaissance paintings, and then these like medieval paintings, and everyone's used to like these certain aesthetics and all these stuff. And then you show them this like ginormous, kind of like Hausfrau, Mary, who has kind of like, she's got a lot more gray in her face. Like she just doesn't, or just her face does not look like kind of classical Italian Renaissance-y pretty. And
Mhm.
like most of the time people laugh when they first see it. Like they think I'm gonna kind of make fun of these like ginormous like Hausfrau and like this like fat ass Joseph. No, nobody knows this fat ass Joseph. He's in the background, but and so they laugh, which I want them to, like, because I want them to feel the incongruity of it, like the way in which this is not what we are accustomed to.
Sure.
But this is also not just kind of like woke, super sensitive, kind of like 2020 like body positive inclusivity, which can just feel sort of like cheap, you know, like
Sure.
you're just throwing me a bone here because like I'm fat or whatever, but like leave me alone, you know, like I want to be authentically valued for myself, you know.
Right. Not as
And
not as a not as a sticker or a poster child,
yeah,
but
like, oh boy,
authentically.
you're including large people, like thank you, no, but just like just here I am, you know.
Yeah.
But this is just so and so I want to be able to like, it's great because I love that this image automatically provokes that kind of like ha, sort of like, wow, this looks hilarious in a way that is like, this is just not what I'm expecting the Holy Family or the Nativity to look like.
Sure.
Um, and then and then you unpack it, and then you just realize, oh my gosh, like then you're like laughing with delight because there's just such glory there. You know, there's such glory. Then you realize like, oh, if my only notion of beauty is like the mid to late 16th century in northern Italy, I am missing life.
Or mid to late 20th century Victoria's Secret.
Yeah, in fact, then I'm like
Yeah.
legitimately missing life. And I can't understand my own body, and I can't understand other people's bodies, and I can't understand the way in which the body is made to manifest the glory of God. You
Wow,
know?
that is hardcore. And I do love, you're right, like laughing because of the incongruity and the unexpectedness, and then laughing from joy and meaning and spiritual significance. Like that is how we approach the original nativity as well.
Yeah.
Like that kind of like, what the hell am I looking at? This is a god baby in a garbage can. And then suddenly it's like, no, this is this amazing thing. Like I think of all the nativities we're talking about, when they're done effectively, present that vibe. Like an effect, I would argue, and this is an artistic point more than a moral or a spiritual one for sure, just to be clear, but like we often try to make some kind of like artistic takeaway as we're nearing the end of the podcast, which I still don't want to be because there are other things I want to mention. But one of the things that I would throw out there for listener consideration is like, if you have the opportunity to design a nativity, first of all, awesome, good for you. And second of all, an effective nativity doesn't make you feel warm and fuzzy. An effective nativity should go, whoa, that's weird, and then invite you into like, oh, but it's sacredly weird. You know, like that I think is the true kind of spirit of the visual. I don't know, would you agree with that? Or
I mean, like, I like that it can have those, you know, like I mean, nothing has to provoke any particular reaction, you know, but like, but there is something really powerful about the way in which nativity scenes have the capacity to like, unsettle even in being very familiar.
Mhm.
And not, I wouldn't say exactly just like, and you're not saying this, but like not exactly just to be like, I'm gonna freak out the squares, yeah,
Right. Yeah. No. No. Not
but
shocking
like,
for shocking's sake
no,
at all.
exactly,
Not.
but like,
Yeah.
but
No. Never.
authentically,
Never
like,
that.
yeah, but authentically, just like there, I want to see more richly into this, and like, let's do it. Like
Mhm.
however that's going to work. And I think it is, especially because like with the nativity, because it's such a familiar image, like it's always going to have that kind of like either we're just kind of settle for like these like hilariously hallmarky kind of like blur blurry sort of like soft lens filter kind of like paintings of like, oh baby tucked up, oh adorable, or there is something kind of like a hot mess thing going on, which should be kind of discomforting in the end, like exciting but discomforting, and like leading to greater joy and glory. Like I think that's right. I think there's something really there.
Yeah. I. And yet you're right. There are nativities that are created just to shock for being shocking's sake, and we don't like those. I want to talk about some of those. I want to talk about some, and they're part of a larger category. Maybe I'll introduce it this way. So there is a Franciscan brother in Cincinnati where we met, at St. Francis Seraph Parish, which is sort of like the church in the poorest area of downtown Cincinnati, and it serves the poor down there. And he grew up very, very poor. And his like one gift every year that his mom would give him was every year she would give him a little Fontanini nativity figure. And so over the course of his life, he amassed this very large Fontanini collection. And he loved the nativity so much that other people started gifting him these different nativities. Brother Tim Suture, I believe is his name. And I think I'm pronouncing that last name correctly. Anyway, so people started gifting him nativities from all over the world that they would pick up in these different places. And now one of the brewing companies in Cincinnati, Christian Moreland Brewing, one of the oldest beer breweries in the city, every Christmas they give him a little folding chair. And this cute little monk sits there in a Santa hat and greets people and shows them his personal nativity collection of like 500 different nativities.
That's amazing.
From all over the world. And outside, they have a perpetual living nativity that is open to the poor 24/7. So there are these two farms that bring their animals out, and they build a pen in the back of the church, out like in the little courtyard outside, and they have a miniature donkey, which is the cutest frickin' thing in the world.
Gosh.
Like, I freaked out when I saw this little fuzzy donkey. And then to represent primarily the people they're serving, they have two African American mannequins representing Mary and Joseph, and a little plastic African American baby doll. And then a host of sheep and a couple of goats and stuff like that, all around, all alive. And a couple of years ago, this sounds like a Hallmark movie story, and I actually want to pitch him on doing this as a children's book. But a couple of years ago, the security guard who hangs out back there at night calls Brother Tim and says, one of the sheep is freaking out, and you need to come down here right now. Like, it looks bad. And he comes down, and he realizes no one's known, but one of the sheep was pregnant.
Oh my gosh.
And it is giving birth right now on Christmas Eve.
Stop.
And so they call the farmer, and this lamb is born at midnight on Christmas Eve.
Oh my gosh.
And they name it Noel the sheep.
Stop.
And like, it sounds so twee, like you can't imagine it's true, but it's true. Like, he showed me the sheep, and it's the cutest little sheep, and he sent me photos of like when it was born, and it is adorable. And then you go into the actual brewing company, and there are these like hundreds and hundreds of nativities from all over the world depicted in different like folk customs. So there is like the Peruvian nativity, where everyone's in traditional Peruvian dress with in Peruvian folk art, and instead of sheep or camels, there's little llamas, and
Yeah.
And the African nativity has elephants, and all these things made in those countries in the folk art style of that country. Africa's not a country, obviously, but I forget which African country this particular nativity was from. There's a really cool like Alaskan like Inuit nativity.
Oh, cool.
All kinds of really a couple of different Native American and First Nation tribes are represented. Really, really cool stuff. That's, sometimes that's really beautiful and sometimes that's really cool. But there are also the times where that is like grotesque and bordering on, and it's very rare that I would ever say anything was actually blasphemous. I mean, you know me, I have a pretty high tolerance for this kind of stuff. I'm a little bit of an edgelord. If you haven't picked that up by this point in the podcast, I like the sacred crass, as I've been saying over and over again. But some of these nativities, not in his collection, none of these are in his collection, but some of these that I've seen, like I was in a Christmas store in Savannah, Georgia over the summer, and they had like a nativity where all of the figures were puppies. So there was like a Jesus puppy and a Mary puppy. There was one where they were all like black bears in like a little like cabin style stall.
Black bears,
like,
that's fun.
Little bears. There's
gosh.
And some of these get a little weird. I don't know. What's your feeling on how far we can change a nativity in the way they're represented before it becomes just not the nativity anymore? I mean, it's pretty obvious that like if you depict it in a Peruvian folk setting, you're still trying to represent the nativity in a beautiful way, just with a different artistic tradition and with a different like cultural focal point. I would think. Maybe you disagree with me.
Right.
But
No. I think that's right.
So that's beautiful and sincere. But then there's this line that we cross at some point when the nativity is like teddy bears, where you go, this isn't
the nativity anymore. Yeah, this is a saccharine cultural thing. I would say, like, maybe this is just off the top of my head, but if you can think of it as an apparition, the Virgin Mary, particularly for the last 500 years or so, for reasons known only to her and the Lord, will like very, very, very rarely like appear to use often to people that are sort of new to Christianity or whatever.
We'll make sort of Bill Murray-esque cameo appearances.
Yeah, and like and just and will appear basically invariably like looking like the people to whom she's appearing.
Right. The most notable being like Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Our Lady of Guadalupe is an important one.
As
also,
like a half Mayan person, half Spanish person, and bringing those cultures together in this private apparition that she appears to Saint Juan Diego.
And so like, and we understand this, like it's not denying the historical specificity of her life as like a first century Jewish woman, which is indispensable and central to like the mystery of who she is and who she is in our lives and stuff.
Yeah, I think I want to say this really quickly. The present tense verbiage you're using there is really important.
Critical,
like, not who she was, but who she is. Mary is presently a Jewish woman.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Continue. And so and we see that like also that she can manifest her body is already alive in heaven, and so it can communicate the reality of who she is in some ways that a pre-resurrected body can't. And so it seems that part of the way in which she manifests herself as mother to all nations and mother to all people is in these particular circumstances that she will manifest with even being literally one of them by physical appearance without ceasing to be who she is, but like that her manifests her body in a way that is as if so dramatically their mother that she's like one of them. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason I bring that up in this context is like if we can imagine it, these nativities, these creches, if we can imagine them being that, like they have to authentically be messengers of the incarnation. They have to be trying to represent the historical reality of the incarnation. And like it is a splendid and glorious way
about it. And something about it. Yeah.
It is a splendid and glorious way to represent the historical living reality of the incarnation, to represent like me and my entire village, like carrying our stuff to baby Jesus. Like, and baby Jesus is probably like baby Jesus and his parents are probably going to look like me and my villagers,
Yeah,
and that's like
and
all
rightfully so.
awesome. That is a really beautiful, respectful, um, deep dive into the glory of the incarnation. So I'd say like anything with the nativity where we can think of that it's happening in that way, then like boss. But once it is no longer manifesting the resurrection or manifesting the incarnation, I think then we are in a world of like emotional manipulation and kitsch in its most negative sense.
Yeah, in the absolute most
In the
negative,
absolute
like,
negative
toxic
sense.
Yeah.
Um,
I like what you're saying though, because in my mind it was like a matter of dignity, which you're not saying. But you're going a step further in an area I really like, which is when Christ or Mary in an apparition appears differently than a first century Arab Jewish person, they are doing so to ingratiate themselves and to affirm something about the culture where they're appearing and the person to whom they're appearing. But Jesus or Mary, they're not going to appear to dogs. They're not going to appear to bears, right? So I think it's not just like, oh, teddy bear baby Jesus or Mary baby or puppy baby Jesus is like somehow classless, although yes, it is. It's tasteless and classless, but also like Jesus cares about you. Jesus cares enough to appear to you. He doesn't appear to a teddy bear, right? And I think ironically, like, wow, this is really cool because okay, sit with me here. I'm kind of live processing this, so I might not get my words exactly right, but all the nativities we've talked about, you and I as the viewer are a central participant in that living narrative.
Sure.
Right? We are players in that story. The story still is going on, whether that's in an explicit way because a little physical carving of me is in the nativity, or whether I'm walking through St. Francis's nativity of live animals, or whether it's just set in my time period, or whatever it is, I'm part of that scene. I'm part of the art form. But by making a nativity, it's easy to assume that a nativity representing baby Jesus as a bear or a dog is wrong because it misdepicts Jesus. But it's almost wronger, I know that's not a word, but it's almost more wrong that it subtracts me from the equation because it makes the audience the teddy bear or the puppy rather than me, and then becomes anti-incarnational, anti-human, because I'm no longer part of the narrative.
Right.
It becomes this thing over there, and that's why it's kitsch in the most toxic sense, because I'm no longer actually part of it. That's really interesting. That never would have popped into my head unless you said the apparition.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, thinking about that it excludes the viewer, that you're right, that this is happening strictly speaking without you, except for your basest passions, basically, because all it's really playing on is like, oh my gosh, like mom loves teddy bears. So like, look, teddy bears, so it's playing on your baser passions, it's just like, which is to say, it's
not
it's emotionally manipulative.
Like, it's not. I'm not saying that it's wrong to love teddy bears, but
no, but but all that like a teddy bear representation of the nativity does, it just hooks emotion into this like emotional aspect of the person, which is not bad. And like, sure, fine, love teddy bears, that's fine. It just hooks into it, and then it drags that down, and that's it.
And it boils them down to being just that. That's all mom is now.
Yeah.
Mom isn't a child of God anymore who Christ became incarnate for. Mom is just a person who likes teddy bears. And it's reductionist and objectifying in the crassest way.
Yeah. And she's happy. She's so obsessed with teddy bears that she's happy to see literally every beautiful thing turn into a teddy bear. It's like she has the Midas touch, and isn't that amazing? Only it's the Midas touch that turns into teddy bears, which is like way worse than Midas, actually.
That sounds like a Black Mirror episode or like a Twilight Zone episode. Like
exactly.
They touch turns into a stuffed
teddy bear.
Ugh. That is creepy on like a level I can't describe. But the sad thing is, though, and maybe I shouldn't even bring this up because this might take us too long, but some of these really cool cultural nativities, like, for instance, the Peruvian one, are in a very very cemented place which is this year. The official Vatican nativity set is a Peruvian nativity with llamas and stuff in it.
Awesome. That's so
And
legit.
and every year, I'm friends on Facebook with this guy from Malta who like designed the nativity for the Vatican a couple of years ago, Manuel Crèche. Interesting feller, but sometimes the Vatican, and that's cool. Like the Peruvian folk art nativity scene is cool. But sometimes the Vatican nativity scene is not received quite so well.
Right.
And borders on kind of what we're talking about here. With kind of the crassness. Specifically, I'm thinking about last year where it was like spaceman nativity made out of like weird dowel pegs. And then the year before that where there was a sincere attempt to make it a reflection of, I believe, the works of mercy, which are, these sort of tactile things we do to love other people in Christ's name, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, bury the dead. But to depict this, they literally had like somebody burying a dead guy in front of the baby Jesus and things like this. And there were some people who hated that, and there were some people who really liked that. With the spaceman nativity, almost everyone hated that, who knew about it anyway. Talk to me about that. I mean, what are your, without
I
like
was
freaking
thinking,
out, but like,
yeah.
What are our
we were
thoughts on
talking
some of these
about that.
Vatican nativities and the point of the Vatican nativity and like why it's weird sometimes?
Yeah. Well, why it's weird sometimes, I think, is just that like, then it can just fall into bureaucratic art politics, and so like, well, I want to look inclusive, and I want to look modern, but I want to look like local, and I want to look. I think it's just falling between a whole bunch of different like bureaucratic stools, basically, and like it can just end up being sort of quality, like artistic reality. A real artistic quality is, I think, low on the list of points that are trying to be made there, and I think that's a real degradation of the church's dignity and glory as a patron of the arts. So I'm sad to see that, but like, okay, I mean, but it's not like they're the only ones, but because like,
They're the biggest ones.
Father so and so from down the street also doesn't know how to be a patron, and I also am very passionate about that. But I was thinking, we were just talking, I was really thinking about that spaceman nativity because of how disincarnate it was. Like, it's not, you're not a part of it. It's not taking place on Earth. It's not, these aren't humans. They're not humanoid. There's no like drawing me into it. Even the kind of like that alienation, that sort of feeling of like that we were talking about with like plus size Mary and all, like, it's not like a shock followed by like, oh, a deep dive in and I discover like radically more about the incarnation than I did before. This is like a shock, and then I try to dive in and I realize that it's like a quarter of an inch deep, and there's no diving to be had, and there's no revelation of the incarnation to be had, and like, that's it, So I feel like that particular one, it's not just that you can say like, I mean, I'd be happy to say like there are things artistically with it, stylistically as an aesthetic, that I don't think work, that I think were more sort of like art political than like artistic in motivation. But I think ultimately that like that's the problem with it as a nativity, is just that it's like disincarnate, and like, what's the point then? I mean, it may as well be teddy bears.
Right. And to reiterate, I mean, when we say disincarnate, what we're meaning is that there isn't that invitational capacity. I am not part of it. It doesn't say something about my human dignity alongside of Christ's human dignity.
What's it even saying about Christ's humanity?
Right, sure.
Like, that one I think went far enough to be like, what are we even saying about Christ's humanity? But then also mine too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, what would be then? I mean, I already know I proposed one takeaway for artists of my own. I proposed that a few minutes ago. But based on what we're exploring now, I mean, if there's some artist, Catholic, Christian, purely secular, who wants to experiment in the space with this theme, with this imagery, I mean, like, what are some of the based on the highs and lows, the pros and cons of some of the nativities we're exploring in this conversation, what are some of the takeaways we might offer to artists trying to do something with this in this space? I mean, what would be your 2 cents that you would add to that?
Well, I just don't think that a secular artist is going to be able to have like a rich, intuitive grasp of this subject. And
That's
so
fair.
I would say like, I just, people have different takes on this. I generally don't think that, secular people can make, really strong, revelatory, insightful art of of a religious and sacred nature, um specifically with Christianity, because they just can't. You can play with the forms all you want, you can do all kinds of like clever things, but like, this is, again, this is what we were saying from the very beginning, this is about a revelation of the way in which God became flesh. And
Right.
if I don't believe that he did, then it's going to be really hard for me to do anything other than just like make nice formal play, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like somebody who's been trained in like musical composition and like number theory, can string together, a pattern of notes that will sound, to an untrained ear, kind of like Mozart, actually. They just won't have any of its splendor or beauty, you know, but you can train
Sure.
anybody to do that, you know.
And this is a general
um
point about the arts that I think is important. Like the late Norm Macdonald, who I mentioned in another podcast, graduate of Saturday Night Live, talks about how, he thinks the key to doing a good comedic impression of a celebrity or a politician is to genuinely like them. Like he
yeah,
doesn't think you can do a good impression of someone, a funny or authentic impression of someone, even though you're taking the piss out of them, even though essentially you're picking on them, unless you have like a deep interior respect for them. And I think that that's essentially what you're saying. Like unless you have a personal relationship with Christ on some level, even
I
a
just,
tentative
yeah,
level, you probably can't do this.
yeah, just maybe just look for some other way to express your art, you know, which is totally fine. And just like come back, put a pin in it and come back later if you want, but just maybe not right now, because I do think that like one of the most important things to do here is to meditate really richly on the scriptures, and to meditate really richly on like, um art art history of like depictions of the nativity, not because you're going to copy them, but precisely to see like what have these, people seen, and like how can I be challenged by like the freedom of what they have the freedom to see, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like that's because ultimately this is the this is the claim of faith here, is that like this can never just be a story, it can never just be like words on a page, that like the more that I like dwell with this nativity reality in my heart, then it can like, let me put it this way, you're like, you are asking in by your labor, by your hard work, by your study, by your like endeavoring to hone your skills as finely as you possibly can, you're looking to produce like Margaret of Castello's like heart image of the nativity, like the image that you bear in your heart, you want to like pull out and present
Mm.
to somebody. um and you can't do that unless you have the nativity in your heart, unless you actually want to meditate on it and like let it like crystallize down, you know, and really burn and really become solid, and then it can really become a gem with an image on it that you are ready to present, you know.
Well, and I think, you were joking before about, the little intimate family surrounded by wizards being a good representation of my spirituality. But I think you're hitting on something here. I want to do a whole episode at some point about the difference between art and propaganda. But, you know, without getting into the full exploration of that, I think what we're both pointing to here, maybe you would disagree or add nuance to it, but I think what we're both pointing to here is if you're going to create some religious artwork and it's a sincere expression of where you're at spiritually, even if it's really effed up, there's going to be something true, good, and beautiful there, for us to look at. But if you're going in to create a work of religious art, if it's whether it's a nativity or whether it's like a movie, and you're trying to didactically deliver a message to somebody else about something, it's probably going to come off probably going to be toxic.
Yeah, probably so.
Yeah. like, because if it's a reflection of who you are, because we are active participants in the Nativity, in the true living, in like ongoing incarnation, and because we're characters in that narrative, if it's about your relationship with Christ, if it's about you and Jesus together in that space, there's going to be something sacred in there, even if there is a llama or, you know, a morbidly obese Mary or whatever it is. But if you're saying, oh, I really want to go, you know, introduce this to somebody else in this way or that way, it's probably not going to work.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, we've been at this now 2.5 hours, which on the one hand I love, because I kind of love the idea of people driving home for Christmas and listening to this.
Awesome. I hope that happens.
But on the other hand, as many other stories and nativities as I'd like to get into, we're just gonna have to save it for next Christmas. So I love you, buddy. Thank you for doing this with me.
This is great, man.
I hope you have a Merry Christmas, man. I hope it's really, really blessed. And listener, I hope, you know, from our family to yours, you have a Merry Christmas as well.
I don't have a family, but Merry Christmas.
Our family is the whole church, Father Gabriel. and anybody who listens, our little podcast family, anybody listening, you know, you're our family. And we love you very much. And we wish you Merry Christmas. Go forth and create cool things. This has been Created Things, an art, soul, and mind production with Jacob Flores-Popchak and Father Gabriel Torretta. Production by Kyle Meineke and Jessica Flores. Theme song by Federico Carranza. For more on the podcast and on its hosts, visit artsoulandmind.com.